come from the bowels of hell.
The Dana Gould Hour.
Jungle worms and swamp rats run around your feet.
I fought a dog that killed the calf that ate the canary. What is truth?
And once again, welcome back.
And we're back. Hello, and welcome back to the Dana Gould Hour. Your brief audio respite from the world's worst reality show, Reality. Samm Deighan is here. Samm is a film historian and author, and she's written such books as The Legacy of World War II in European Art House Cinema and a study of Fritz Lang's child murder romp M. Her new book, written with Andrew Nette, is entitled Revolution in 35mm, Political Violence and Resistance in Cinema, From the Art House to the Grindhouse, 1960 to 1990. It covers everything from the Battle of Algiers to Coffin Joe to Zabriskie Point. She's a columnist. She's an essayist. She writes for the Criterion Collection. I could talk to Samm all day, but we whittled it down to a little over an hour. But it's a great conversation. You're really going to love it. Also, Harry Medved and Bennet Yellin are here. Harry Medved wrote the book, The 50 Worst Movies of All Time, when he was in high school. He was 15 when he wrote a book. That was in the late 70s, before VHS tapes. He had to find this stuff on broadcast. He also wrote, later with his brother Michael Medved, the Golden Turkey Awards, which, as you know, is what helped put Ed Wood back on the map in the mid-'80s. Harry has a series now on PBS called Location Land, where he takes audiences on a tour of famous film locations. These are movies that were made back when films had locations, as opposed to standing in front of a green screen at a warehouse in Atlanta. I recently had the pleasure of joining Harry on a tour of the locations for a little film you might have heard me talk about in the past, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Harry is joined by his friend Bennet Yellin. Bennet is an author and screenwriter. He's written with the Farrelly brothers There's Something About Mary, Dumb and Dumber 2. Bennet and Harry have been pals for eons, and they're here to talk about bad movies and good movies and Ed Wood movies, which are, of course, the perfect alchemic mixture of the two. True Tales from Weirdsville tells the tale of a place both wonderful and strange, Twin Peaks. Like everyone else, I was super bummed by the passing of David Lynch this last January. I think it was just a combination of things. The election, we were in the middle of these catastrophic fires, and then, just when things couldn't get worse, they did. As much as I love David Lynch and his work, and I have back to, I guess, Blue Velvet was when I became really aware of him, what he stood for meant more to me than any particular film or television show or what have you. He was uncompromising in his vision. You could like it or not. That wasn't the point. That's a rare thing these days, when studios and networks seem to be operating under the belief that the only audience worth pursuing is everyone alive, and anything less than that is a failure. Twin Peaks, in its origins, its success, and its fall from grace, and then subsequent resurrection, is a terrific microcosm of how Lynch's refusal to compromise created something far greater than the sum of its parts. It flew against conventions, it challenged audiences, it did not serve them what they wanted. In the case of Fire Walk with Me, it really challenged audiences. But in every instance, time has proven David Lynch's instincts were right. So we're going to do a 2, possibly 3-part series on Lynch's career through the lens of Twin Peaks. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Right around the time as I'm making this, and you'll hear me talk about it on the podcast, Amazon now controls the James Bond films. For the first time since their inception, they are no longer controlled by the Cubby Broccoli family. The first thing Jeff Bezos did was go on X and ask audiences, who should be the next James Bond? This is the perfectly wrong thing to do. It's the exact opposite of what David Lynch would have done. You don't ask the audience what it wants and then give it to them. It drives me crazy. As for me, oh great googly moogly, it's starting to get busy. As you may know, my new special, Perfectly Normal, is now out on YouTube, and the accompanying album is available on iTunes. If you'd prefer to see me live, and who wouldn't, I will be performing at the Improv in Brea on Wednesday, April 2nd. One night, one show, the Brea Improv. Brea, where La Habra and Yorba Linda meet to work out their differences. On April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, I will be in Batavia, Illinois, not far outside of Chicago, at the Comedy Vault. On April 11th and 12th, I will be at the Comedy Attic in Bloomington, Indiana. On April 13th, I'm not anywhere, but Dr. Z is returning to the stage in Los Angeles. He will be performing at Dynasty Typewriter in April with a Z, with Maria Bamford, Paul F. Tompkins, and Broadway Barbara. On April 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th, I will be joining the Good Doctor in Austin, Texas for the Moon Tower Comedy Festival. And on May 23rd, 24th, and 25th, I will be joining the Good Doctor once more in Oklahoma City for GalaxyCon. For details and ticket information, please go to the live appearance page at danagould.com. Also, I want to let you know about another podcast that may interest you. My wife, Kat, recently finished work on a documentary entitled Ex-Friends. It examines what she calls the other divorce, when friends separate. There is a language and an etiquette for divorce, but not one for when friendships go south, even though it has happened to everyone. Her documentary recently won the LA Film Award and has been featured at a bunch of festivals. I'm obviously incredibly proud of my wife. And she has decided to spin it off into a podcast, Ex-Friends, with Kat Gould. And it's out now. Please check it out if you're interested at wherever you get your podcast. EX-FRIENDS. Ex-Friends. Lastly, if you like the show, we always encourage you to sign up for our Patreon. Just go to danagould.com and click on the link, and for $5 a month, you become a Dana Gould Hour Sky Cadet. That entitles you to a little something extra every month, some extra audio, video, what have you. We don't have graduated levels. For $11 a month, I'm not going to come over to give your grandmother a perm. $5 a month, become a Sky Cadet and get some stuff. And now, it's on to our filthy business.
Tune in, it's a gas. It's the Dana Gould Hour podcast.
The Dana Gould Hour. Never an hour.
It is a sunny, warm, spring before spring day here in Southern California, high atop the Mulholland Drive view shelf in the city of Los Angeles, the People's Republic of California, here in the former United States. My guest today is author Samm Deighan, who, along with Andrew Nette, has a book entitled Revolution in 35 Millimeter, and it is the study of political violence and resistance in cinema from the art house to the grindhouse, covering the period of 1960 to 1990, what is described in the book as the long 60s, which makes a lot of sense. And what better time to discuss it? Here as we reluctantly are dragged into a second era. Samm, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I'm glad that the book has been so well received, but sad that it's because it happens to be politically well timed.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, as the old saying goes, to live in interesting times. One of the things that was you talk about in the book, the earthquake that was World War II in the 20th century, and that World War II really broke the world, and the way that governments formed and reformed in its aftermath is really what informs these different movements. And tell me if I'm wrong. Many of the oppressive police states that emerged in the wake of World War II were supported by the United States because they weren't communist.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this goes actually back to the 1910s and 20s when you have communism, socialism, capitalism, what we might think of as liberal democracy, and fascism all kind of coexisting in a more balanced state than after World War II. World War II really forced this ideological battle between US-based capitalism and communism. And I think even though we were allies, especially in the last, say, 3 years of the war, what happens in the Cold War starts around that time when it becomes this really kind of deranged way of different nations saying there can only be one dominant ideology. We cannot coexist. And so we're going to support, as you said, these really, really repressive regimes because we're willing to do anything to make socialism and communism fail. And right. I think we're still seeing the repercussions of that now.
Yeah. And that was the famous thing that Kennedy said about Cuba. It was like, he didn't want to blockade Cuba. He wanted to sell them televisions. China today is not a communist country.
No.
It's communist. It's all different. It's
communism light.
Yeah. It's communism light. Lots of free markets, centralized government. What the book talks about is how in these repressive regimes that one of the ways that people can express their dissatisfaction or express a political belief that's contrary to the powers that be is through film. And that because the films are fictionalized, not only do they get by the government censors, but it tells people in the world what is going on. I think one of the most famous examples of this would be Z by Costa Gavras.
Yeah.
Give us a little background, like for the uninitiated, give us a little background as to what was going on during that period and what that film meant.
So basically, one of the regions that really still struggled with fascism in the immediate years after World War II would be Spain and Greece. Spain, of course, neutral in the war. They have a fascist government until Franco dies in the mid-'70s, and it lingers on after that. Greece had this whole civil war situation, basically lots of military dictatorship related issues. And Z looks at this, it does this really interesting thing where Costa Gavras is someone who I think is thought of as a more art house filmmaker by mainstream audiences, but I think actual art house directors and film critics and intellectuals writing about his films at the time saw him as more of a mainstream genre filmmaker, like someone who wanted to make popular cinema to entertain people. And so I think Z exists in this really interesting space between this art house critique of fascism and dictatorship and political corruption, but it's also a genre film. And so I think because it's not lecturing at you, it's a lot easier for people to engage with some of those themes.
The political story is in the background. It's a very conventional story. Just the basic plot is, and again, correct me where I'm wrong. There's a right wing, basically a military dictatorship. There is a left wing political leader that wants to speak at a university. The right wing thugs, the MAGA of Spain, try to shut him down. They manage to give the speech, but after the speech, he's killed.
Yeah.
And then it's a who did it in a court case.
Yeah, so it's this like psychological thriller, murder mystery, political drama, courtroom drama, all rolled into one. And I think because of Costa Gavras's background growing up in Greece, but also so much of his life was spent making films in France, working with French filmmakers, you just have so many incredible people involved in this film. But I think it's such a great example of what we were trying to cover with the book, because it does have those really overt political themes, but it's also not this pedantic documentary. It's like genuinely enjoyable, and who can deny Jean-Louis Trintignant?
Fourth time today I've heard that. But no, it's true, and it's the as the old saying goes, if you want to send a message, call Western Union. You present the political story as the world in which the conventional story takes place. But what that does is it gets the message out to the world of, this is a country where if you want to speak out against the government, people will try to kill you.
Yeah. And I think it was something that was happening when he made the film. I mean, there just have been or were decades of that kind of repression politically in Greece. And it's something that I think kind of found its way into the government. And that's a really troubling, like speaking about it from current political terms.
Right.
When you see fascism in a particular area and then it's sort of quote unquote defeated, it's never really. It just kind of gets reabsorbed back into the government. The same thing happened in Germany with the assistance of the US government. Like the majority of Nazis were just kind of repatriated back into their country. A lot of them were high-ranking government members. Yeah. In the 70s. And so the same thing going on in Greece, you see it in Germany, you see it in Spain. And I think that's also part of why it's so concerning that we have so many fascists. Well, one of the many reasons it's concerning we have so many fascist-leaning people being voted into office.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that happened in the fall of Iraq was the de-Baathification of Iraq, that you didn't allow these people to go back into government. And as a result, they were free to form a revolutionary resistance movement.
As you do.
As one does. And, that is an interesting thing, in World War II, basically the people that didn't go back into the German government came to Alamogordo, New Mexico with Werner von Braun, or they went to Russia against their will, in large part.
Yeah.
It will be interesting to see if we emerge from this period electorally, what happens to the MAGAification of the U.S. government.
It's a scary time, but I think a lot of these films, even though they're made, 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of them suggest that resistance is possible regardless of the political circumstances you're in, which I think is a really hopeful message.
How did you find yourself in this world?
Well, as a teenager, I got really, really into Italian genre cinema for no apparent reason. I think
like Giallo or...
Yeah, like Giallo films, like Lucio Fulci, spaghetti westerns.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
I think it was mostly just I came across something at the video store and was like, this is for me. From there, it just made me seek out a lot of different kinds of films. I started writing about film and was lucky enough to start writing for, books and magazines and Blu-ray releases. I do a lot of commentary tracks. That's basically the majority of my work at this point is probably writing books and doing commentaries for different kinds of films.
Uh-huh.
And I think having that background in horror films and erotic cinema, I tend to write a lot about how bodies are depicted on screen. Uh-huh. And so it seemed sort of inevitable that I would do something about political violence in films. And so I was very happy that Andrew, my co-editor on the book, when I sort of pitched the idea to him that I might want to do this kind of book, and originally I thought of it as a solo project, he was like, well, if you want to do an edited collection, I would be your co-editor. And I think it's a much stronger book because you have so many different people's personal experiences and just, subgenres that they're really drawn to. We have writers from all over the world, and
it's oddly comforting in the sense that this cyclical chaos that befalls the world. Nope, this has all been done before. This has all been done before, and people do emerge from it generationally, and the disruption of, and in this case, it's although the way the world sorted itself out in the aftermath of World War II, that chapter finished, and we are now writing the next chapter. I'm talking about months ago. For the very first time in American history, the American government is siding with Russia over a democratic country in an insurgency. That is the antithesis of the Truman Doctrine. It's the first time that's happened since 1945. So it's very relevant to what's going on today. What I'm wondering is, because cinema and film production has changed so much, will we see American revolutionary cinema?
I certainly hope so. I think so. Earlier I made a comment about how growing up in the US, you're always told over and over again in so many different ways that the best thing about the United States is we have this freedom. And other countries, especially communist countries, socialist countries, they have zero freedom at all. And there's all this censorship there. But the reality is that there's a lot of censorship here. And the censorship here has to do solely with money. Can you get a film made and have it distributed without the blessing of different production companies, distribution companies, theaters? The answer is no. So depending on what kind of film you're trying to make, like if you were trying to make something like Battle of Algiers or even something like The Spook Who Sat by the Door,
right?
I don't think you could get it made and distributed today. Most of what comes out that I think people talk about as being leftist or revolutionary is very watered down, very what I would consider liberal, which to me is much further right than actual leftism.
Yeah, conventional post-war liberalism.
Yeah, so post-war liberalism, if this is confusing for anyone, because I know that it is. I think leftism is much more aligned with socialism, communism, wanting to provide communal support for people and doing that through various economic and financial policies, so on and so forth. Liberalism basically says, actually, capitalism is fine and we would like to keep it. And so that, I think, is the sort of biggest difference.
Right. Yeah.
And I think under liberalism, you don't really get a lot of, especially American liberalism, you don't really get a lot of films that critique it and suggest that there's some other alternative, because I think a lot of audiences are not geared to want it, though I do think that's changing. I mean, from probably 2020 till now, there have been these sort of big wave radical movements. I mean, we have this almost universal support of Luigi Mangione, which I never could have imagined happening 10 years ago. So I hope that it's changing the climate to allow artists, writers, filmmakers to sort of return to some of that revolutionary art that was being made so frequently in the 60s and 70s.
Right. And again, as everything is old is everything old is new. The support for Luigi Mangione is just a step up from the feminist support of Valerie Solanas.
Yes.
Who unsuccessfully tried to murder Andy Warhol. And we're glad she didn't succeed.
We're glad she didn't succeed.
But there was, far left feminist literature was like, this is the beginning of, this is a good thing. somebody made the point that when they saw how much people supported Luigi Mangione, he disappeared from the news.
He totally did. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Except so on Chinese social media, he does not seem to have disappeared, which for obvious reasons, because they don't really have any vested interest. But my favorite thing in the entire world right now is that on Chinese social media, people refer to him as the people's husband, and I now cannot think about him any other way. But it's like a couple weeks ago, once everyone realized this guy's getting so much support, just silence, crickets.
Yeah.
Let's say I make a film about even Luigi Mangione and what's going on with him right now. If you aren't getting it to audiences and you're not getting it in front of people, it's not going to film festivals. It's not going to none of these kinds of movies would ever go to a streaming channel except for maybe Tubi. Shout out to Tubi.
When you talk about, can you reach an audience? Because everyone thought, well, the internet is the great equalizer.
It was.
The internet will get everything to everybody, but it's just a diarrhea machine gun. It is. And I was using this example the other day. I posted a mild joke about Chuck Schumer, not because I hate Chuck Schumer, but I want Chuck to do better.
I mean, as you should want all Democrats to do.
Yeah. When King Kong is on top of the Empire State Building, you get a plane and you shoot him. You don't go, we're very disappointed in Kong's decision. And because I posted this joke, immediately my feed was filled with suggested content based on my activity.
Yeah.
Do you want to become a part of All Democrats Are Communists? Would you like to buy this commemorative January 6th mace?
Oh.
It's just like, and what it is it's just, hey, do you want to hate this stuff psychotically? Which side do you want to psychotically hate? And we'll feed you enough garbage to get you there.
And that's also what I mean by censorship is people tend to have this very black and white view of censorship where censorship can only mean that it's banned by a government committee like in the Soviet Union, but that's not it at all.
No, self-censorship is also pernicious.
Totally. But also even with things like the media, I hear a lot of people starting to talk about how when they watched the news in the 90s and even early 2000s, it was very different news than the way news channels are now. And social media is the same way. It's like the algorithm, both intentionally and unintentionally, shapes what you watch, what you have access to, which I think in itself is a form of censorship.
Yeah. And as my friend said, you don't watch the news. You watch the news business.
Yes, totally.
And that is the aspect of capitalism that's to me fucked up. Like I am one of those people. I'm a very conventional post-war liberal. I do think capitalism works, but it's like a street grid. It works with stop signs and red lights and rules and humanity. And you can have, a social safety net, and not everything has to be a profit center. And that, I don't know when you could pinpoint that. I know that Reagan was the one that took news.
I think we could blame Reagan for some of this for sure.
Yeah. Information and healthcare are two things that should not be profit centers.
And yet,
Doge, people think, well, we're saving money. You're not.
Not to be this person, but money isn't real. Like the idea that the federal budget is just like fake numbers. So what money are you saving and for what purpose? I think the average person, yes, saving money is a huge deal. But like in terms of businesses and anyone who's over a couple $1 million, how much money do you need to, what is the purpose of saving this money for?
100%. Yeah. And again, I'm not a business guy, but I do have the theory of and I come from nothing. I had, I got free lunch in high school. What if you didn't make all the money?
But yeah, that's what I'm saying.
What if you just made some? What if you just made
can we
some
have
money?
a cap?
Yeah. What if you just made some money? It's like with Netflix, the only audience that's acceptable now is everyone.
Which is such a strange thing to me, which if you're talking about like film and television, I think this idea that there has to be mainstream appeal has been with us forever. But it does feel like in more recent decades, because of things like this push towards streaming, that there are fewer and fewer what we might think of as cult films, like the films covered in our book. We tried to focus on genre movies not really meant for a mainstream audience and art house films, which are also not really meant for a mainstream audience. And those in the last couple decades have really seemed to dwindle. Like when you think about the fact that in the 70s, we had entire cult movie subgenres like spaghetti westerns, rape revenge movies, kung fu movies, blaxploitation, like the list goes on and on. People are still sort of making those films occasionally, but like, where are the dozens of them that used to be produced every year? Right. Yeah. And it's, it's like, where are the films that just make a profit? And they're called Marvel movies. Yeah. But what if it just made money back? What if it didn't make all the money on earth? Well, and I think that's also part of the problem here is that when you have these, especially in American cinema, when you have these budgets that just go up and up and up, the higher the budget gets, the more the profit needs to be. It's like, what if we just have a bunch of mid-tier budget films? Yeah. Like, why can't we return to that? Well, we do kind of have those. That's the horror genre. That's true. Is one of the only genres of film where there's an entry point for new filmmakers, and there's sort of a guaranteed audience because you can sell them internationally. That's true. Which brings me to Coffin Joe. I was thinking about it this morning because I just saw that the Broccolis are no longer in charge of the Bond films. It's now Amazon. I can't believe it. And I am a huge James Bond fan. Like if there was a Bond trivia night, I probably could win. As am I. I don't know where this came from. I grew up watching them with my family and love spy thrillers. Same. And so I'm taking it rather personally that as am I. And the first thing, what? The first thing Jeff Bezos did, who is Blofeld, by the way. He is, but not as hot as he's the Donald Pleasance version. But disrespect to Donald Pleasance. But he also went on X, which I'm not on, and said, who should be the next James Bond? Great. Yes. Don't, and again, it's just like, I can already tell it's going to be awful. It's going to be, makes me sad. And we're going to have the young money penny adventures. We're going to have, they're going to fuck it to death like everything else. And it's depressing as shit. It's really depressing. Yeah. Well, we can pretend that the last one, the final Daniel Craig movie, which I actually liked and thought was a sort of fond farewell to his run in the series, that can just be the last Bond movie. Yeah. I'm fine. I can't imagine. It was just very depressing. It's just very, we could be surprised. I mean, No, we can't be surprised. We know exactly what's going to happen. Well, I do, but it was just, what I meant is like, I didn't think that one of the best movies last year would star Godzilla. So I could be surprised, but also that Godzilla movie, while I liked it, it sort of supports this like nationalist warmonger. It's like an apologetic, let's totally make Japan great again kind of movie. Yeah, totally. But also, I love Godzilla, and hearing that, getting to hear the Ifukube score in IMAX, like I'm just a sucker. I can't. I like shed some tears. Other people were crying.
Yeah, no, it was when I first heard it, I whip panned to the person. I was like,
and you can't help yourself. It, like you get the goosebumps, and you feel like a kid again for a second.
Yeah. No, it was great. Yeah, I agree 100%. But yeah, the Bond thing is really depressing.
It's making me so sad.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm not the biggest fan of No Time to Die because I thought it kind of missed the point of the whole character, which is he wins.
He's a very different
he
character.
has no feelings and he wins.
It felt almost more like, let's rewrite this as specifically a send-off for Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig was the producer. He is an actor. Actors want a death scene.
And he got one.
He got one. It was great. I mean, I don't know of anybody. It's depressing. Anyway, let's go back into this. So people don't, again, like the average, like Brazil lived under a military dictatorship from the 60s to the 80s. I think it was like from 64 to 88.
Yeah, it lasted a while.
Yeah.
Thanks to the US.
Yeah, the United States propping them up as we do.
We love it.
Because they weren't communist. And they played cards. What's the word I'm looking for? They cooperated with what we wanted from Brazil,
which was basically just give us money and some resources and don't be communist.
Yeah, that's it. And there are two figures that came out of the Brazil film industry that we specifically talk about in the book. One of them is Glauber Rocha. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Glauber Rocha. And the other one is Jose Mojica Marins, who's known as Coffin Joe. We love Coffin Joe.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Coffin Joe made horror movies starring Coffin Joe.
Which, but they were the most incredible gimmick.
But they were incredibly subversive.
Yeah, he almost reminds me of the Brazilian horror movie parallel to someone like the Marquis de Sade. And if you have never actually read any Sade stories or novels, they're very sexually transgressive, but they're subversive because they push back on every single aspect of conventional society. They're really, really anti-religion, which is something that Coffin Joe shares and was.
And Brazil was an incredibly Catholic country.
Very upsetting for Brazil.
And the Catholic Church was fully fine with the military dictatorship that ran Brazil.
Well, as Catholicism often goes hand in hand with military control and right-wing governments.
Yeah. I want to read a section of the book. He stars in a lot of movies, but there's a basic Coffin Joe trilogy of his character. And those films are At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul in 1964. Obviously, the original title is in Spanish.
Brazil or Portuguese.
Portuguese. That's right. Brazil speaks Portuguese. That's right. God damn it. I've made that mistake before.
I think it's a common mistake for non-South American folks to make.
I did it to my daughter's Spanish teacher in a parent-teacher Zoom. And she went, Portuguese. And I, went, go fuck myself. And that was a problem. It's At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. This Night, I'll Possess Your Corpse.
It's a great title.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do with a corpse? And then there's a big jump. That was in Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul is in 64.
This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse is in 1967. And then the third one is in 2008.
Yeah, Embodiment of Evil.
Little bit, but he made other movies in between there. But I wanted to read you, for people unfamiliar with Coffin Joe, I wanted to read you how he's described in the book. Nothing in the Coffin Joe series is overtly radical. Coffin Joe is an utterly self-interested human being, a man determined to get what he wants to please himself. He never voices the slightest interest in what is going on around him politically or socially. He has a narrowly focused will to power, and what goes on elsewhere and affects the condition of others is of no concern of his. Sound familiar?
All too familiar.
It is amazing because he's in a country that's run by a military dictatorship that has a very strong Catholic fist behind it. He's an utterly self-interested libertine, which in and of itself is an act of rebellion, because it shows people you can also be this.
I mean, he also, he looks like he practices black magic. He has these long fingernails. He wears a cloak, and he's obsessed with creating the perfect heir. Like, he's trying to find a bride so that he can impregnate her non-consensually if need be. Yeah. But I think those aspects
if you don't meet the standard, you may just be killed.
You'll probably be killed. But those more conservative, machismo aspects of his character, I think it's intentional parody. It's let's show you how deranged these conservative family values really are when taken to these extremes. It's wonderful.
Yeah, no, it is, as again, it says in the book, he has no respect for his neighbors or any of their customs and habits. An ardent rationalist, a denouncer of superstition, he looks down on those whose ideas he considers unscientific. He's an atheist expressing over and over his contempt for Christianity and the Catholic Church. And he was able to slip this by because it's a horror movie.
It's a low budget horror movie. Who's going to pay attention to that? Meanwhile, he's one of the most famous Brazilians in history.
Yeah, it's him and Sergio Mendes.
Isn't Pele Brazilian?
Possibly Pele was Brazilian. I just realized, I didn't know this. Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass. Mm-hmm. I don't believe anyone was Hispanic.
I'm not surprised.
I certainly don't think nobody was from Tijuana.
It's really not. That's the sort of thing where it's okay, that checks out for the for the time period.
Yeah, exactly. I love, my favorite thing is old Italians in Indian wigs in John Wayne movies. Everybody.
Oh my God.
That's a pagoda. That's
it, watching. So I sometimes have to do commentary tracks for more classic period, at least pre-1970 Westerns. And it's the sheer number of Italian actors, Spanish actors, occasionally some Mexican actors who play Native Americans. It's they will put any single person in a wig and put eyeliner on them.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Before hiring a native actor.
The other interesting thing about Coffin Joe is he just looks like a traditional American horror movie host.
He does. It's incredible.
He just has the cape and the hat. But he's doing, and this is a weird reach, but it's true. He's doing what Rod Serling did when he created The Twilight Zone. Rod Serling wanted to write about social issues. He wanted to write about racism. He wanted to write about prejudice, and he couldn't do it because of censorship.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
So he said, well, I can't write about black people and white people, but I can write about Martians and Martians and Earthlings.
Which is another, again, to my point about censorship.
Yeah. And it was 100%. I mean, the thing that broke it for him was a movie he wrote called A Town Has Turned to Dust, which was about Emmett Till. And it was completely deballed. And he was just I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore.
Which is when you think about these incredibly brilliant writers, showrunners, producers who wanted to do so much more than they were allowed to, it's It's heartbreaking. Maybe we can get Coffin Joe to resurrect Rod Serling to run the Young Miss Moneypenny show.
My friend Aaron, I got to call him. My friend Aaron Lee met Coffin Joe at a convention, and he said he cursed us. We said hello, and he had a translator, and he said, like, may your intestines turn to snakes and devour your insides. And they're like, thank you, Coffin Joe.
It's a memorable greeting.
Yeah. The American section of the book that it's covered is the way the American counterculture made itself known through film. I mean, Easy Rider is the one that people always point to as the film that legitimized the counterculture. And funny, it's mostly Easy Rider is written about because of its effect on capitalism, because it broke the movie industry. And what was interesting in the book was in its aftermath in 69, 70, 71, major studios tried to cash in on the success of Easy Rider by making these counterculture movies.
And they're ridiculous.
They're ridiculous. And nobody went to see them because the people that they were made for smelled a rat and didn't want to go to the movies. And the people that were going to the movies didn't want to see it.
Well, and it's, I think, an example of earlier when I was saying that I would love to see a resurgence in this type of filmmaking. I don't think it will happen because of exactly what we're talking about here. This idea that when you have these big studios, producers who are used to astronomically budgeted films, giving the green light on these kind of revolt movies, there's a real a problem of authenticity where it's just clear that the person making the film does not have these values and is just trying to cash in. Yeah. And like some of them are interesting, but usually in a campy way where they're trying to do this sort of subversive thing where they present the student radicals, but by the end it's like, oh, we should just embrace regular American life because that's the that's the best way forward.
Well, it's true. I mean, the two that stick. I mean, one of the most successful was Zabriskie Point, which was made by Michelangelo Antonioni.
Which is so weird to me that Antonioni even made a film here.
Yes, but again, it's a fairly conventional story about a guy who's kind of, he's not a long-haired freak. He's a very conventional looking guy. And he goes to a student protest. Somebody dies. He goes on the run. And like most people, he goes on the run in airplanes.
As you do.
As one does. But it's a conventional story about his involvement with girls. The other one is Drive, he said. And what's interesting about Drive, he said, is it's directed by Jack Nicholson. But that also, it's not what people wanted. That's the film that really, it's about a jock. It's not about a revolutionary who goes into that world and at the end kind of leaves it.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes those films interesting to talk about historically, but kind of strange to think about in comparison to the Japanese radical films and a lot of the European radical films where they do tend to show characters who are part of those movements. And right. That's just, they're sort of centrally involved in them and not these bystanders.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned The Spook by the Door.
Oh, I love it's so good.
Here's what blew my mind. We'll tell the fact that it was directed and co-written.
It was written by. Are you talking?
Ivan Dixon.
Yeah. So Ivan Dixon's the director, but Sam Greenlee, who's the writer, It's based on his novel, which he wrote when he was working for the State Department.
Yeah. And also, Ivan Dixon was this amazing talent. And to be a black director working at that time in the mainstream, which he ended up doing, like directing the Rockford Files. But I know him as Kinchlow from Hogan's Heroes. I was like, it's not that Ivan Dixon. No, it's that Ivan Dixon.
Same Ivan Dixon. He had an incredible career. And Spook Sat by the Door was recently restored within the last couple months or so. And I got to see the restoration in New York, the premiere of it, with Dixon and Greenlee's families in attendance. And it was so emotional. Like just them talking about how their fathers both had these really amazing careers and they loved working together, but this film just got buried basically by the studio and by the FBI. Yeah. So having this like resurgence of it, but I think it also just goes back to what we've been talking about, this idea that even if you make a radical film, does it have an impact if no one's able to see it, if it's pulled from distribution and all of those things?
Well, tell because you know, there are a lot of very successful, popular blaxploitation films. And certainly this film was in that genre, or you could say it was in that genre, but tell the story of the film, because it isn't.
Yeah,
he's not a badass cop who plays by his own rules.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important distinction. So while I love the blaxploitation genre and many of the films in it are incredible and have some great social themes, they are generally made to be this quick profit exploitation subgenre, often made by white directors, white writers, white producers.
Sure.
That are just meant to explore these tropes the way any subgenre does. But then I think you have films that often get lumped into blaxploitation that are made by Black directors or Black writers and just feel very different, even if they're using some of the same genre techniques. And The Spook Who Sat by the Door is about this guy who becomes the first Black CIA agent. And the beginning of the film is hilarious. It's basically in this senator's office, and he's looking at his numbers to run for re-election. And they're like, okay, well, you're not going to do so well next election because you don't have the Black vote. And he's like, well, shit, how can we get the Black vote? And they're like, here's how you can get the Black vote and stick it to the CIA. Call them out on unfair hiring practices. And so for purely selfish reasons, this white senator sort of coerces the CIA into hiring a Black agent. And they go through this, rigorous process where they're basically trying to eliminate all of them. Right. Like they just want to go through the motions, but they hire this guy and he gets into the program. He's very successful. And ultimately, though, they basically keep him in the basement copying papers. So they're doing this to themselves. By the way,
everything you've described doesn't
true
sound
to
like
life.
A movie. Sounds true to life.
True to life.
Yeah. Usually the great things that happen don't happen because they're great things. They're great things that happen because it lines somebody's pocket.
Yeah, and I think in the case of this movie, it shows you that this guy genuinely wants to be a good agent.
Right.
And they prevent him from doing his job and keep him copying confidential papers in this basement office. So eventually he retires to become a social worker in Chicago. But while he's there as a social worker, he's moonlighting as a radical, and he infiltrates local gangs and tells them, look, you need to stop pushing drugs. You need to stop pushing prostitution. You need to stop fighting with each other, and you need to get radical. And he trains the gangs. It's honestly wild that this film even got made. Some of it has to do with the fact that United Artists, who put in money for some of the production and for distribution, did not read the script. They thought it was going to be like Shaft, the CIA edition.
Sure, yeah.
But the way this movie goes is these gangs really bond together. They learn all of this different guerrilla warfare. They go to war on the local police department. And the film ends with the suggestion that they're kicking off a revolution around the United States. It's bananas. It's the best. It's the best thing ever. And I hope it happens.
Did David Picker get fired because of this movie, or was it just his time up? I think he eventually
probably a combo.
Yeah, I think he eventually got shown the door. And just as an example of how popular blaxploitation was, one of my favorite things are white blaxploitation films, which are the two biggest ones are Live and Let Die.
Oh my God, I love Live and Let Die.
And The Omega Man.
Oh, okay, good call. Live and Let Die, though,
Say, Jim!
Oh my God. But the fact that Live and Let Die includes elements of, voodoo and Santeria and blaxploitation tropes, and it's like one of the best. Yeah, it's one of the best Bond movies.
The book is insane. The book Live and Let Die is incredibly brutal and insanely racist. I know that they cleaned it up for one of the recent republications. I'd like to read it because it's pretty jaw-dropping.
I mean, those Bond books across the board are more violent than the films, but because
horribly,
extremely violent, often he's very cruel, but less like charming and one-linery than we come to associate Bond with. But also, it's like they're written by a British guy who was in World War II as a longtime intelligence officer. Of course, they're racist.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm telling you nothing you don't know. When you think of the classic James Bond, it's not really the Bond of the books at all. It's just Sean Connery. He goes, I think I read one of them. like Timothy Dalton. I read all the books. I went back to the books. And Sean Connery's like, no, I didn't. I just did what I did.
He just kind of embodied Bond.
Yeah. They weren't great books.
I mean, they're fun. If you like pulp fiction, they're amazing. But also be prepared that they're a bit dated.
I love them. I have them all. I've read them all. But the way Timothy Dalton talked about them with this reference, you read them on the toilet.
Yeah, it's like they're pulp books.
Yeah, you're not doing Pride and Prejudice. You got to have a little bit of fun with it.
I mean, I think Jane Austen would have loved The Spy Who Loved Me, personally.
Oh, yeah. We could have that whole other podcast. Before I let you go, because I've kept you too long, just out of curiosity, and then I want to ask you a couple of quick questions. What's your favorite Bond movie?
I have to say Goldfinger because it was my I don't think it was my introduction, but it was the first one where I was like, I drank the Kool-Aid, and the scene where he's strapped to that table in Fort Knox and Goldfinger and he says, "Do you expect me to talk?" And Goldfinger says, "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." Plays on a loop in my head sometimes. I love them all. I even like On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Sure.
I even like Moonraker.
It's a pizza. A bad one's good.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, a bad one is still good.
Probably Goldfinger.
Yeah, well, Goldfinger is the best one.
Yeah.
My favorite is not the best one. I love You Only Live Twice.
That's a good one. I mean, they're all good.
And it's because that's the one I really remember watching when I was 10.
That's me and Goldfinger.
Yeah,
I must have watched it 100 times.
Yeah, sitting on the floor with my brothers watching this, and it felt like a Godzilla movie. Some of the actors from a Godzilla movie.
Yes.
Blofeld was kind of a monster. The ship landing looked like the ship landing in Monster Zero. It was shot at Toho. So yeah,
that's the one where there's the the female assassin drips the poison down the rope into his mouth when he's sleeping. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. And for no reason, he becomes Japanese.
Oh my God. We haven't even talked about Yellow Peril movies and Yellowface in Hollywood and British cinema, but it is everywhere, or was. Thankfully, it's not everywhere anymore.
The whole plot of him getting married and becoming Japanese is completely unnecessary in that movie.
But unnecessary, but at the same time, you're just like,
fantastic.
What? Who made this decision? And there are some very tall Japanese men, but none of them look remotely like a Scottish man.
Yeah, a 6'2" Scottish man. Well, you know who wrote the script for that was Roald Dahl.
Of course.
That's why it's so insane.
Speaking of insane writers.
Yeah. You were talking about body horror earlier as sort of a form of revolutionary filmmaking. What did you think of The Substance?
So I don't want your listeners to hate me. I actually did not see it because I really struggle with new horror. The majority of it that I see, I absolutely hate. And enough people whose opinions I trust and who know my taste very well said, don't see it, you're just going to be mad. Because in general, those types of newer horror films that have a specific agenda ideologically, they just beat you over the head with it, and I get very frustrated.
And you definitely don't want to see The Substance, because I thought it's like, I just didn't think it went far enough. No, I mean,
that's probably how I would feel.
No, I'm being sarcastic. It's so ridiculous. I mean,
it's like too over the top.
It ends up like the sword fight from Holy Grail. I mean, it literally gets like, I get it.
I will say though, I am so happy for Demi Moore finally getting some career attention. Like, what the hell took so long?
But a great modern horror movie that I bet you would like is Presence, the Soderbergh film.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's really good. It's a ghost story told. It's all the ghost's POV. But it doesn't get tiring. It doesn't get annoying. You forget it. And the twist is great. I really, really enjoyed it.
Presence. All right. I'll definitely check that out. I also have to recommend, speaking of newer body horror, Cronenberg's newest film, The Shrouds, is, I think, the best film he's made in 20 years.
The Shrouds? I haven't seen it.
Oh my God. It's so incredible. It's basically a body horror film about grief and dying, and is clearly made about the death of his wife a couple of years ago, who, was one of his really close collaborators. It feels super personal. I got to see him do a Q&A after the New York Film Festival premiere, and he talked about it in a way where it was like, yes, this is really personal and is about the grief that I went through, but, also just so smart and funny and engaging. And it's like, people give him money to make all the films he wants to make while he can still do it, please.
Well, and that leads to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, was he is an auteur and he does make what he wants to make. And I think it seems extinct at this point.
Well, I think even he struggles with it. He talked about how his last film before The Shrouds, Crimes of the Future, he had the script written for 15 years and couldn't get funding. So it's like, even though you have this auteur director with a devoted following who's one of the most talented living filmmakers, even he can't find money to make what he wants to make.
And I think that's why, and again, this is also the timing was exquisite. David Lynch is bigger in death than he was in life.
I'm still so sad about that. I don't know why I didn't see that one coming, but the fact that Jodorowsky, who is nearly 100 years old, as is Roman Polanski, they're still around. They're still doing things. They didn't
smoke 4 packs of cigarettes a day either.
That's true. That's true.
No, that is what killed him. And that's
I
why
know.
when I see all these cool guy pictures of him smoking, it's like, that's
It
why
hurts.
he's dead. Yeah, that's why he's dead. Don't glorify that. The same with Bill Hicks. It's like,
Oh.
you know, Bill would still be here if he didn't smoke so much.
And we could use him.
Yeah.
But yeah, David Lynch, it was incredible to me to see the sheer outpouring of support on social media from
Yeah.
like regular people. I don't know that many regular people anymore because
No, I
I'm
don't
just like
either.
around movie nerds.
Yeah.
But even like the regular people I knew were upset about it. And
Yeah. And I didn't love everything he did. And
Sure.
I'm sort of forcing myself to reappraise things because I'm a story guy. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
So I used to say like, you know, David Lynch telling a joke, knock, knock, who's there? Doesn't matter. Look, a balloon. What? I want to know. But I also, have no problem admitting I'm wrong about things. I need to take.
I think that's healthy. I do the same thing, especially like so often for me, if a story or a film doesn't resonate and I go through some sort of life experience and watch it again, it's like, oh, now I see a different side to this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the example being Fire Walk with Me, which I saw that opening night. I was
whoa
Twin Peaks nut. I lived in a house with a bunch of people. We had the Bob Wanted poster on the fridge. We had pie parties. We went and we got wrapped in plastic, the fan magazine. Like we were all in. We got
That's
the
amazing.
Twin Peaks Gazette. We were all in. And I saw that movie and I hated it.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. Because it wasn't the show.
It's very, very different. And
Yeah.
I
then
do get it.
But then I watched it 20 years later and I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for this.
Yeah. And for me,
it's a tough topic.
I think it's the film. So I, watched reruns of Twin Peaks growing up and fell in love with his 90s movies. Like I loved Lost Highway when it came out. It's still probably my favorite Lynch film, but Fire Walk with Me was the film that really, really made me love him because I think it is such a Lynch film, but not to get too real here at the end of the episode, but I think speaking from my personal experiences, it was the first film I saw where it felt like someone made an honest movie about surviving sexual abuse.
Yeah.
In a way that
Sure.
like I didn't expect it to be so like destroyed watching this film.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that a lot of it's like he used Twin Peaks as a vehicle to tell a story that people didn't want to like. I don't want to, it's like, I don't want to know. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it.
yeah.
It's horrific. So, hats off to him for doing that. But it was one of those things where, I wasn't ready for it at the time. And now I'm going to go back. And look, I was, and it was also because of the election and, Trump was elected in 2016 and Bowie died.
I know
Lynch
that
died.
was too much. Bowie and Lemmy from Motorhead died within like a month of each other. And it was like, well, we're just done now.
Yeah. I have a weird Lemmy story.
I bet living in LA.
Yeah. Yeah. It was weird. It was one of those things where I thought about it. I was like, did that really happen? Or did I dream that?
It probably really happened considering Lemmy.
It did really happen. It did really happen. But yeah, and it was one of those things. It was just like, and I was moved. I went down to Bob's Big Boy and put something on the shrine. I felt moved to do it. I wanted to be, and it was very in this age where James Bond is owned by Amazon now, that he was uncompromising and he had enough commercial success that he could make what he wanted to make. And it was, I hope that someone else comes along and does those things in a way that you get like, yeah, I could go out tomorrow and make a movie on my phone, but people have to see it.
And David Lynch would be mad if you made a movie on your phone and if someone watched the movie on their phone.
Yes, exactly.
But it's bonkers to me that he was just this like unrepentant surrealist, again, saying, it doesn't matter what's happening. Nothing means anything. But at the same time, could impact so many millions of people with so much emotional resonance in so many of his films. Like,
yeah.
We're gonna miss him.
Yeah.
I mean, I already do.
Did you see The Return?
I did. I wasn't expecting it to be like that. Loved it.
Me neither.
But I've started a rewatch, so I'm gonna go all the way through. I'm almost to the end of season 1, so I'm gonna do season 2, Fire Walk with Me, and then The Return.
Yeah, season 2's got some tough ones there.
Aside from certain things like the town beauty contest, which makes me want to kill myself for some reason, there's some stuff in season 2 that's really fun.
Yeah, the Civil War. The
Civil War is so good, and just like the way they start to get more into the Black Lodge lore, and
it has one of the most chilling lines when Maddie is killed.
Oh,
and the giant appears at the Roadhouse, and just says he's so sad, and he just goes, "It's happening again." It's so, I get chills just saying
I just got chills right now.
It's so chill. It's really, that's really sad.
Such effective storytelling.
Yeah. And you might not, I'm older than you. So then after the success of Twin Peaks, there was like 40 crappy ripoffs. It was like Oliver Stone's Wild Palms.
Oh, God.
And Northern Exposure, which was like the candy coated.
I loved Northern Exposure,
but that was just like,
I was a kid when I was watching it.
Sure, yeah. It was the Twin Peaks for kids.
It was like Twin Peaks for kids and regular people.
Yeah. And then the X-Files was absolutely a
one of the best shows of all time.
I agree. The book is called Revolution in 35 Millimeter. It is by Andrew Nette and Samm Deighan. Where do you prefer people buy the book?
It's pretty much available in every online retailer. Mm-hmm. You can get it through the publisher, PM Press. I would say if you could avoid giving Jeff Bezos more of your money, please do so.
That's what I've been doing lately is if it's on Amazon, it's someplace else.
Yep. Yeah. And you might have to wait a couple more days, but learn some patience.
Yeah, it's fine. It's getting harder. I got rid of Google Maps, and I'm becoming an old weirdo. But it's like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I quit X. I'm off Google Maps. I don't want to go to Amazon if I don't have to. It's just like it doesn't do anything, but it just
but for peace of mind.
Yeah.
And especially if where your dollars are going, I do think has value.
I do own 5 Cybertrucks, so I should cop to that. I have a fleet.
Well, okay,
a fleet
Elon.
of Cybertrucks because I finally love that the Jawa transport is on our highways.
That is what they look like.
It's exactly what they look like. I'm all for goofy. I'm all for design, but this is like, what's good? A dumpster.
And that's exactly what they look like. Yeah, and much like dumpsters on fire, I encourage. I don't think I can encourage destruction of property on your show, but use your imagination.
I can, yeah. I'm with you 100%. What is do you have a website where you write on regular? Where can people catch up with the Samm Deighan of it all?
So people can either find me on Patreon. It's just patreon.com/Samm Deighan. I'm also on Instagram. Very boringly, my handle is also just my name.
Okay. I will follow you on both. Samm Deighan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, there's an air about hot coffee that's hard to resist.
Full-bodied, refreshing hot coffee makes any time a pleasant interlude. Won't you have some now?
They're true tales from Weirdsville. Tales from Weirdsville. And they're true.
Can your heart stand the shocking facts?
If you were cool and groovy in the late 70s and early 80s, you loved the movie Eraserhead. Now, one such person was Stuart Cornfeld. Stuart Cornfeld attended the AFI, the American Film Institute, and while he was there, he met a fellow student named Anne Bancroft. Yes, that Anne Bancroft. Anne Bancroft, who was already a very well-established movie star. She'd already been nominated for Best Actress 5 times. She won for The Miracle Worker. But Anne wanted to direct a movie, so she took classes at the AFI. And there she met Stuart and ended up asking him to produce her directorial effort, her first and only, the 1980 film Fatso, starring Dom DeLuise. It sounds like a comedy, but it isn't really. It's a comedy drama, and it has a big heart. It's an underrated film. It's incredibly sweet. Bancroft then introduced Stuart to her husband, Mel Brooks, and Mel asked Stuart to come on board to help produce his film, History of the World Part 1. Stuart ended up going to work full-time at Mel's production company, Brooks Films. And although Brooks is one of the most accessible, user-friendly filmmakers on the face of the earth, when it came to the films that he produced, films that were not Mel Brooks movies per se, he was unafraid to take artistic risks if he believed the payoff would be worth it. To that end, Brooks and Cornfeld made a great pair. Cornfeld also knew what regular people liked, but he was also eyeball deep in the art world and the avant-garde. His wife, Johanna Wendt, was a celebrated performance artist and seminal figure in the late 70s, early 80s LA punk scene. Long story longer, Stuart loved Eraserhead, and so he set up a meeting with Lynch and then introduced Lynch to Mel Brooks. Brooks Films had the rights to The Elephant Man, at the time a hit Broadway play based on the true story of John Merrick, who was, the Elephant Man.
I expected to meet a young Max Reinhardt. I expected the guy to have, like Picasso, 2 eyes on one side of his nose. And here is a young Charles Lindbergh. He looked just like Charles Lindbergh. He says, we just have to move things because I have to think about directing it. Not the screenplay, but the movie. Good talk. So I said, you're hired. I hired him right then and there.
For the record, Cornfeld also introduced Brooks to a young David Cronenberg for his remake of The Fly, starring Jeff Goldblum. Brooks hired Cronenberg too. The Elephant Man went on to become a huge critical and commercial hit. It was nominated for Best Picture, and Lynch, in his major motion picture debut, his only full-length feature before Eraserhead, was nominated for Best Director. Robert Redford won the award that year for Ordinary People, beating out both Lynch and Martin Scorsese for Raging Bull. Oh well. Fun fact. Mel Brooks had his name taken off The Elephant Man, even though he produced it, because he thought people would see Mel Brooks presents The Elephant Man and, quite rightly, think it was a comedy, which it was not. Fun fact number 2. After Brooks Films, Cornfeld went to run Ben Stiller's production company, Red Hour Films. I knew Stuart really well. He hired me many times, put a lot of money in my pocket, and was instrumental in my getting a job working with Mel Brooks for a time. So when I talk about how smart and committed and inventive and warm-hearted and just fucking great both of these guys are, it is firsthand information. Stuart, sadly, passed away in 2020 of cancer, regrettably. He was very young. He was only 67. Best guy ever, though. Anyway, with The Elephant Man, David Lynch didn't so much appear on the scene as explode onto the scene. He was a hot property, and when you're hot, you're hot. He got offered pretty much every film that was in production at the time, including, oddly, a little film called Return of the Jedi.
I was asked by George to come up to see him and talk to him about directing, which would be the third Star Wars. And I had next door to zero interest. But I always admired George. You know, George is a guy that does what he loves, and I do what I love. The difference is what George loves makes hundreds of billions of dollars. So I thought I should go up and at least visit with him. And it was incredible. I had to go to this building in LA first and get a special credit card, and I had to get special keys, and a letter came and a map. And then I went into the airport, and I flew up, and then they had a rental car all ready for me, and this keys, and everything was set, and I was to drive to this place. And I came into an office, and there was George. And he talked with me for a little bit, and then he said, "I want to show you something." Now, right about in this time, I started getting a little bit of a headache. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So he took me upstairs, and he showed me these things called Wookiees. And now this headache is getting stronger. And he showed me many animals and different things. Then he took me for a ride in his Ferrari for a lunch. And George is kind of short, so his seat was way back, and he was almost laying down in the car. We were flying through this little town up in Northern California. We went to a restaurant. Not that I don't like salad, but that's all they had was salad. Then I got a really, almost like a migraine headache. And I could hardly wait to get to home. And even before I got home, I kind of crawled into a phone booth and phoned my agent. I said, "There's no way, no way I can do this." He said, David, calm down. You don't have to do this. And so George, bless his heart, I told him on the phone the next day that he should direct it. It's his film. He invented everything about it. But he doesn't really love directing. And so someone else did direct that film.
Lynch did not make Return of the Jedi, but he did make Frank Herbert's Dune for producer Dino De Laurentiis. David Lynch's Dune is a saga unto itself and is covered extensively in Max Avery's book, A Masterpiece in Disarray. Max talked about that book and the film on this podcast exactly 1 year ago in our March of 2024 episode entitled How You Dune, if you want to check that out. While Lynch did not have the burden of realizing someone else's vision, as he would have on Return of the Jedi, he did have problems on Dune. And he didn't have final cut. Dune was too big for one movie, and despite its large budget, it still wasn't large enough. Some of the special effects turned out to be decidedly subpar, and despite Lynch's valiant attempts to wrangle it into shape, the released version was not his cut. It also bombed, and Lynch went on to refer to Dune as the only one of his films that he considers a failure. Lynch bounced back from the career spanking administered by Dune with the brilliant Blue Velvet. Again, surprisingly, for Dino De Laurentiis, who loved Lynch despite Dune's failure. Now, Lynch insisted on final cut with Blue Velvet, and he got it. The trade-off was that his budget, at about $5 million, was probably smaller than Dune's catering bill. Blue Velvet, which someone once described pretty accurately as The Hardy Boys Go to Hell, was a brilliant depiction of Lynch's cinematic worldview, with America presented as a mid-century suburban wonderland, with clean, neat houses fronted by lush green lawns lined with white picket fences and bright red roses. But underneath, sinister forces lurked. When the sun set, a sadistic, Nitrous-huffing Dennis Hopper might just kick the shit out of you for preferring Heineken over Pabst Blue Ribbon. And those lush green lawns were dotted with severed human ears. And that nice young man from the house next door might just hide in your closet and watch while you're sexually assaulted. What was especially great about Blue Velvet was that it was released in 1986, when American culture under Ronald Reagan was going into overdrive selling the idea that America really was a mid-century suburban wonderland, and Blue Velvet was a vital tonic for everybody who knew what a load of horseshit that was. Blue Velvet was such a perfect satire of the culture at the time. It was such a dead center bullseye that a lot of people just weren't ready for it. Nobody was lukewarm on Blue Velvet. Audiences and critics either loved it or hated it. Roger Ebert said of the film,
"Sure, the movie's well made, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it."
Now, to put Blue Velvet into context, this is the cinematic world in which it lived. The big box office hits of 1986 were Top Gun, The Karate Kid Part 2, and Crocodile Dundee. I think Pretty in Pink was in there somewhere, although to be fair, so was Platoon. But you can see how Lynch's dark vision rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. In his memoir, Room to Dream, co-written with Christine McKenna, Lynch quotes Dino De Laurentiis' appraisal of the film after one particularly disastrous pre-release screening. "It's a not for certain people, but it's gonna be okay." But enough people, enough critics, and enough moviegoers got it and loved it. It made money, got some stellar reviews, and David Lynch was once again nominated for Best Director, this time losing to Oliver Stone for Platoon. But voila, David Lynch was hot again. He was looking for his next project when his agents at CAA did what agents do, and that is, they put together a package. A package is where an agent bundles as many of the agency's clients together onto one particular project. It's how showbiz works. In this instance, the project was Goddess, an adaptation of the book Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe, about the final months of the life of Marilyn Monroe, written by Anthony Summers. That book, among other things, implied that the actress's death could be directly tied to Robert Kennedy, which has never been proven, of course, but has been a long-standing conspiracy theory. It was great trash, and CAA proposed that Lynch team up with another one of its clients, writer Mark Frost, who had risen to fame as one of the key creative voices on the revolutionary TV cop show Hill Street Blues. Lynch and Frost got on well, and together they wrote a script, and the script came out great. And when they presented it to the studio, United Artists, they took one look at it, noted that the film implied that JFK and RFK were the bad guys in the story, and immediately passed. But Lynch and Frost liked each other, and they enjoyed working together, so they began to bat around some other ideas. They ended up writing a surrealist comedy called One Saliva Bubble. Lynch describes the story again in Room to Dream. "I got this idea about a secure research facility in the fictional town of Newtonville, Kansas, and the two cretinous guys who work there. One of them laughs, and a saliva bubble goes flying out of his mouth and floats down a hallway, around a corner, and lodges in the housing of a sensitive piece of equipment and shorts it out. Then you cut to outer space and see a satellite deploy and a kind of ray gun weapon that fires, and then a countdown starts. One Saliva Bubble was well received, had heat, and was a go picture. Steve Martin and Martin Short were both signed on to star as the two cretinous employees of the secure research facility. But about a month and a half before shooting began, Dino De Laurentiis pulled the plug, citing budget concerns. His concern being he didn't have any money left for the budget, or any budget for that matter, and was closing up shop. Enter Tony Kranz. Tony Kranz was also an agent at CAA, and he got wind of the fact that one of the agency's big clients, film director David Lynch, the Blue Velvet guy, was collaborating with one of the agency's writers, a guy from Hill Street Blues. So he asked if he could meet with them to pitch them an idea that they collaborate not on a movie, but on a television series. Lynch and Frost liked the idea. They went off and they wrote The Lemurians. What? Yes, The Lemurians. The story of Geiger counter-wielding FBI agents who travel the country in search of survivors of the lost continent, Lemuria. Lemuria is a lost, sunken continent like Atlantis, but its inhabitants were all intrinsically evil. And when Lemuria sank beneath the ocean waves, a handful of survivors escaped and are now living among us. Lemuria didn't go, but Kranz was tenacious. He wanted something more like Blue Velvet, the white picket fence with the sinister world underneath. They just needed to find the best way to graft Lynch's vision onto an established TV format. Kranz showed Lynch and Frost the series Peyton Place, the 1960s primetime TV soap opera that took America by storm from 1964 to 1968. And made movie stars of, among other people, Mia Farrow and Ryan O'Neal. Lynch hated Peyton Place, but it gave him an idea, and he and Frost sat down and worked up a concept that they called Northwest Passage. The show was set in the Pacific Northwest, in a small town that was also stuck in Lynch's neo-50s mid-century wonderland, just like Blue Velvet's Lumberton. And the jumping-off point for the story was the murder of the small town's homecoming queen. The image that kicked off the idea was that of her dead body washing up on the shores of a lake. ABC loved the idea. And then, the writer's strike of 1988. Boom! No pens moved from March to August. When the big writer's strike of 1988 was over, ABC called back and said, "Okay, guys, let's go." And Lynch and Frost said, "Great! Let's go with what?" And ABC said, that show you pitched." And they said, "Oh, yeah, great. What was it again?" "The Thing, The Thing, with the dead homecoming queen." Oh, yeah. Frost and Lynch dug out their notes and wrote the pilot story, which revolved around, you guessed it, the body of a small-town homecoming queen washing up on the shores of a lake. They added the flourish that the body was now wrapped in plastic. The lead character of the show, the audience's eyes in, as they say, was FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, as played by Kyle MacLachlan, who, after starring in Dune and Blue Velvet, had become Lynch's on-screen proxy, much in the same way Robert De Niro was to Martin Scorsese. The pilot, still called Northwest Passage, was shot in and around Snoqualmie, Washington, in February of 1989. By all accounts, it was freezing. But it worked. The pilot was finished and the buzz around town was that it was amazing. Robert Iger, who was then the head of programming at ABC and is now the king of Disney, loved it. But he had a problem, a very common problem. ABC had hired David Lynch to come in and do what David Lynch does. And then he did it. So then ABC said, "We can't show this. This is what David Lynch does." Robert Iger, to his credit, fought the good fight with the network brass in New York and won. And Northwest Passage, now renamed after the town it was set in, Twin Peaks, was picked up as a mid-season replacement with an 8-episode order. The pilot plus 7 additional episodes. Now, the beauty of this is that it allowed enough time for all of the episodes to be written before any of them were shot. The arc of the first season was allowed to be carefully plotted and laid out. It gave them time to do it right. Lynch and Frost wrote the first 2 episodes themselves, and then Frost put together a writing staff, while Lynch went down to New Orleans to film his next movie, Wild at Heart, based on the Barry Gifford novel Wild at Heart, The Story of Sailor and Lula. There is a popular misconception that season 2 of Twin Peaks suffered because David Lynch abandoned the show to go make Wild at Heart. That isn't true. He had finished shooting Wild at Heart before Twin Peaks even premiered. Twin Peaks was picked up to series in March of 1989. but it didn't premiere until April 8th, 1990. A full year after the pickup, which is crazy. But when it did premiere, it went through the roof. There was a strong buzz leading up to it already, and the fact that David Lynch, the Blue Velvet guy, was making a TV show was news in and of itself. Now, this was back before streaming, when the line between TV and movies was still pretty stark and distinct. Two-time Oscar-nominated directors didn't usually do TV shows, much less TV shows starring the same guy that starred in their movies. Twin Peaks hit network television and the culture itself like a sledgehammer. Twin Peaks became an overnight pop cultural sensation. Now, while the shorthand to describe it at the time was Blue Velvet, the TV show, the country had changed since Blue Velvet was released. When Ronald Reagan left office in 1989, the party that was the 1980s was breaking up and the hangover was setting in. Starting in about 1989 and lasting until about 1994, pretty much the exact length of the George H.W. Bush term, the country's mood and tone was nasty. It was a sour, headachy time. The population in general had caught up with the joke that the people who loved Blue Velvet when it first came out already knew, that the whole deal was a crock of shit. The stock market crashed, the economy soured, the presidential election was bitter and nasty, the whole mood was plangent. And this was reflected in the popular entertainment of the time. For example, the #1 box office film in 1986 was a 2-hour Navy recruitment commercial called Top Gun. In 1989, it was Tim Burton's Batman, a movie where it's always night and everyone wears black and stands around while a sociopath dressed as a bat fights another sociopath dressed as a clown. Twin Peaks was the right show at the right time, and it took the country by storm. It showed us America as we like to see ourselves. A small, friendly town with damn fine coffee and great cherry pie. And it also showed us America as we knew, deep down, we really were. A small, friendly town with damn fine coffee and great cherry pie, and a dead homecoming queen floating down the river, and a brand new brothel doing boffo business just on the outskirts of town. Twin Peaks dominated the culture that spring, summer, and fall. It was on Thursday nights, and after the first or second episodes, people started having Twin Peaks parties, where your friends would come over and you'd have cherry pie and coffee, although the coffee went largely untouched, and it became cherry pie and booze. But then you'd have cherry pie and booze and watch the show. My girlfriend and I, at the time, were all in on it. We had the famous "Have you seen this man wanted" poster of Bob on the fridge. We had a Twin Peaks Sheriff Department's coffee cup. We went bananas. One Thursday afternoon, my girlfriend at the time and I were going to have people over that night to watch the show. So we went to Ralph's and we were going to buy a cherry pie. And they were out. They were out of cherry pie. We could not find a cherry pie in Los Angeles. Which was fine with me. I hate cherry pie. I like apple pie. And that's what we had. And I loved it. Fuck you, cherry pie. Anyway. Season 1 of Twin Peaks ended in June of 1990 on a cliffhanger, with Kyle MacLachlan's Dale Cooper lying on the floor of the Great Northern Hotel bleeding out from a bullet wound. That summer, you couldn't walk 10 feet without seeing someone in a Who Killed Laura Palmer t-shirt, or hearing Julie Cruz's ethereal Twin Peaks tie-in album Floating Into the Night, written in large part by Lynch and his composer and musical partner Angelo Badalamenti. That August, Lynch's new movie Wild at Heart, starring Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, premiered, which is proof that he didn't make it later the next year. Wild at Heart got mixed reviews, but it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and made solid box office. As season 2 of Twin Peaks approached, Kyle MacLachlan hosted the season premiere of Saturday Night Live, and in October, David Lynch himself appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, David Lynch, the wild-at-art genius behind Twin Peaks. David Lynch was a brand. He was on top of the world. What could possibly go wrong? How about everything? As you will learn next time.
More to come from the Dana Gould Hour.
And now, on with the show.
It is a crisp, windy, but beautiful day, high atop the Mulholland Drive view shelf, here in sunny Los Angeles, in the People's Republic of California, in the former United States. I'm joined today by two very good friends of mine. Once you hear their credits, you'll understand why. Harry Medved, I'm going to say a phrase I don't throw around willy-nilly, a gadfly. I said it. Among his other books, the Golden Turkey Awards, the 50 Worst Films of All Time, the Hollywood Hall of Shame. He is the host and producer of Location Land, a new series on PBS. And he is joined by his longtime friend, who I actually am just now meeting. So when I said that we were good friends earlier, I was lying. But now you know how easily I lie. But he is the author of such films, co-author of such films as Dumb and Dumber 2, Stuck on You, In the Blood, Santa's Little Helper, which is not the biopic of the Simpsons dog. Please welcome my good and new friends, Harry Medved and Bennet Yellin.
Thank you, Dana.
You guys, what's interesting, Harry, you and I met through our mutual love of Ed Wood.
Right.
And did you guys meet through your love of Ed Wood, or did you meet and then discover Ed Wood?
Bennett, do you want to take that?
No, well, we met, Harry and I did not meet through our love of Ed Wood. We met in Hebrew high school. We both went to,
at the Hollywood Athletic Club in its worser days.
Oh my God.
It was actually falling apart. That is where
it's worse than it is now.
Even worse than it is now. It was god awful. That's where the University of Judaism was located. So we would see each other, on Sundays at Hebrew school. It was just the worst.
Yeah. And then I guess it's some, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just saying, if anyone's been to Hebrew school, they can tell you what a punishment it is.
Yeah.
It was, but what we found out later is that we had this mutual affection for bad movies.
I have to interrupt with one quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a large Jewish community in Los Angeles or show business?
There's a decent sized Jewish community, sure.
As I say, I'm not a Jew, but I'm Jewish.
You are definitely, no question.
Any comedian.
There you go. Do people think you're Jewish, Dana?
Yeah, because of Gould.
A Gould.
Oh, that's funny.
And I'm a comedian, and
even though you talk about your Irish Catholic background.
Yeah, I've got all the red flags.
Yep. There you go. But at any rate, so
it's very simple. It's with this is painting with a very broad brush. Jews are based on shame. Catholics are based on guilt. It's not.
It's the same kitchen. Yes,
yeah, it's the same kitchen. And what was the old expression? The old expression was the Romans felt so guilty about killing Jesus, they invented Catholicism to blame it on the Jews.
The old expression.
We found out later in life, in our later years, right after high school graduation, that we both loved bad movies. And I would say that after my first book, The 50 Worst Films of All Time, was published, Bennett gave me a hard time for not including Plan 9 from Outer Space among the 50 worst. And so he was the one, along with his friend Paul Clemens, who starred in this movie called The Beast Within later, said, you guys missed the boat on Plan 9 from Outer Space. And you have to see this movie we just found called Glen or Glenda. You won't believe it. It's from the same director of Plan 9. So that's how the whole ball started rolling down the hill.
Wow. And this is late 70s? Early 80s?
Yeah, Bennett.
Late 70s. Like
No. It's after the book. So it's probably in the 80s. What year was the 50 Worst Films of All Time published?
So I was 15 when I started writing it in high school. It was published in 1978. And it was honestly just hastily put together because I was trying to get through high school. And a lot of times I'd be asleep in class and my professor...
You don't have to apologize for rushing through the book you published while in high school.
I'm just saying teachers would nudge me while I'm sleeping and I'd say, I'm sorry I was up late watching Santa Claus Conquers the Martians for a book I'm writing. And they just thought I was making it up. But for one reason or another, we didn't include Plan 9, and we took a poll at the end of the book when it was published in 1978, asking people, what is your pick for the worst film of all time? These are our picks for the 50 worst films of all time. That book was, by the way, co-written by Randy Dreyfuss and uncredited my brother Michael Medved.
Right.
And so we were astonished when we had this flood of fan mail saying, we agree with you guys, Robot Monster is 100% deserving of being in the book on the 50 worst films of all time. But how could you guys write a book on bad movies and not include Plan 9 from Outer Space? What were you thinking? So it actually won, hands down, the grand prize for the People's Choice for the worst film of all time. So we weren't the ones who picked it as the worst film of all time.
It was a reader's poll. It was a reader's poll, yeah.
Exactly. So Bennett was one of those readers, and Bennett, nudged me and said, dude, they didn't say dude back then in the early 80s, I don't think. But it said that we have to get together. Did they? Okay.
I think, I'm guessing, I think that became part of the lingua franca around Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think it was Sean Penn.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, we weren't hip enough to say dude.
Yeah.
But at any rate, we were just a bunch of, teenagers horsing around, and we were having fun with it. And Bennett says, you got to come over and see this movie, Glen or Glenda. My friend Paul Clemens taped it. He had one of these very fancy high technology machines that it was a Betamax or something that he brought over to Bennett's house.
Right. In down. Right. Yeah.
Before
the size
VHS.
of a tackle box.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah.
And it was on Channel 52 in Corona, California, the same channel that used to show Three Stooges shorts and Speed Racer. And so we watched this movie, Glen or Glenda. It was also directed by Edward D. Wood Jr., and we started piecing together, wait a minute, who is this guy? These movies all have this very similar theme to them. They all have the same kind of crackpot dialogue, the great mise-en-scène of the films. And so we started trying to unravel the story of Ed Wood. So even though...
No, just because Plan 9 from Outer Space, we've had this conversation so many times. It's not the worst film of all. It's far from the worst film of all time because it's consistently entertaining.
Yeah.
It 100%. May be the most inept. But even that, I don't think so, because it's beautifully shot. It's just,
it's not inept, and
it's gloriously bad.
It's incredibly entertaining, and I mean, there are so many bad movies that are badly made, and you wouldn't think of them twice. That just eked out, But that movie had something else, and so do all of his films. They all have
100%. Like Oliver Stone, his films are always entertaining. There's always something. And he was like the Sean Baker of his day. He didn't win 4 Oscars.
Right.
Or an Aura, but he did, write, direct, edit. I mean, he did everything. And
that's what I always say when people mock Ed Wood. I'm like, how many movies have you gotten made? You know how many movies that goddamn guy got made? Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's amazing. He was a brilliant filmmaker. I think that unfortunately in our books, whether it was the 50 worst films of all time or the book that we followed it up with, which was called the Golden Turkey Award.
Right.
And that was the book where we called it the worst film ever made.
Right.
And we crowned Ed Wood as the worst director of all time. I think in some ways, maybe we did give Ed Wood a bad rap. I think, Dana, you and I have talked about this. He was not clearly the worst director of all time.
No, you did. I mean, but the thing is, but it is what put him on the map and brought him to the attention of people like me, like at that time, like 1984?
1980.
Okay. And then I got to it around 1984. But that's when, I'm 20 years old. I'm living in Boston. I'm an open mic comedian. I'm hanging out with Bob Goldthwait and Tom Kenny, and we found this book, and it was also a very important thing that's not commented about. The other thing that dovetailed with that was Late Night with David Letterman and the explosion of irony in comedy.
Yeah.
And Ed Wood was the perfect mate to that. Like, yes, I can enjoy this in the way that, David Letterman does Stupid Pet Tricks. It's the same strain of comedy.
Yeah. Bennett and I talked about this. Bennett, I don't know if you want to discuss how it was unusual for people to laugh at things that were considered bad before this, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm going to confess it shamefully that what entertained me about Ed Wood movies was that they were bad, and I was making fun of him. Like my attitude was, he's terrible, he's the worst, and that absolutely evolved as I learned more about him, as I realized that he was a craftsman on the fringes of Hollywood, and he had this incredibly eccentric gang, and he was just, and he had this huge output, and I began to realize that this man he did the best he could, and the best he could ends up being incredibly entertaining for reasons he may not have intended, but that doesn't matter, and I came to love him. I went from being derisive about him to loving him, and that's I love that journey. So
Well, I think we all did.
Bobcat and I are working on an Ed Wood project right now.
Yeah, can you tell us how that's going? Like,
Bobcat and I made a documentary together called Joyride. Ironically, Bennett, didn't you write a movie called Joyride too?
Yeah, Joyride too. Yes.
These are unrelated films.
Yeah.
Bob and I did a documentary. Just followed us on the road in literally the weeks before the COVID pandemic. It was February of 2020, and what could go wrong? And
great doc.
Well, it's all Bob. And we both love Ed Wood. We met over that in 84, and the documentary was released by a company that had this weird footage. It's one of these companies that just buys stock footage, and it's just like they got a warehouse full of film cans, and somebody was reviewing it and said, gosh, that looks like Ed Wood. And somebody said, I think Bob Goldthwait has an Ed Wood tattoo, which he does. And so they call Bob, and it turned out to be footage from a lost Ed Wood film. It's based on one of his many great novels. And he wrote it and starred in it, and it was directed by someone else. And it's a lot of boobs. It's a boob movie, but it's an Ed Wood movie. There's a weird story. It's set in Vietnam. Vietnam is played by Griffith Park, but it's a movie, and they have like 2 reels and no dialogue. So Bob sees it, and then he brings me over to look at it, and we both know enough about him that we realize what it is, and so we think we should finish this. And then it hits us both at the same time. We're doing exactly what Ed Wood did with Plan 9. We have only, instead of Ed Wood, instead of Bela Lugosi, we have Ed Wood.
That's great.
We have the footage of Ed Wood. We need to get one of our chiropractors to play him in the new film. And then it went dormant because the company that bought it got sold, and we had to buy the film and get the right. So that's all been untied, and we are now and we'd filmed a lot of it already. We're now picking the production back up. Friendship and Bob's and my friendship are very similar. It's not that we both like this one guy, but the fact that we both like this guy speaks volumes about the stuff that we do like.
Yeah.
You know?
Correct. Absolutely. And Bennett, I know we were talking about this the other day when you wrote Dumb and Dumber. You clearly have a love of human frailty, of people who are maybe sometimes clueless. I think, Dana, you do too.
Yeah, it's the best kind of comedy.
It's unintentional humor, and I think that's part of why we love Ed Wood so much. And I do think that before our book, The Golden Turkey Awards, came along, there wasn't really a market for movies that are so bad that they're good. People didn't get it. If you talk to older people in the late 70s, they would say, like, why would you watch a bad movie? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys really coined that. So bad they're good.
Yeah, and I do think there's difference, as Bennett said, between a painfully bad movie like a Jerry Lewis comedy that doesn't work and an Ed Wood film. Or a movie like The Creeping Terror, you know,
or Transformers 4, you know.
Exactly.
Dumb and Dumber, to use an example, you have to be all in. You cannot wink at the audience. You have to love these characters and believe these characters. And that's how the Farrelly brothers specifically, I think, the way they broke through was they were unapologetically committed to the joke.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bennett, when you guys were trying to sell the screenplay, did the name Dumb and Dumber work for people? Or did they say, like, why would somebody see a movie? Pay good money to see Dumb and Dumber.
It worked completely against it. It was turned down 3 times. It went around the studios, rejected. We renamed it A Power Tool Is Not a Toy and sent it out again. And it was rejected.
Great title.
And then the third time was Go West, and it was rejected. But the Dumb and Dumber, we heard from people who said their agents said, you're not going to audition for a movie called Dumb and Dumb. The Dumb was not, it wasn't sellable back then. It was considered ridiculous and stupid.
And did it take Something About Mary becoming a hit for that thing to get tried? Had you written that before or after?
We wrote that before. That was the first thing that we wrote together that was produced together, the 3 of us together. Yeah.
Right. And was it only in the success of that did Dumb and Dumber get greenlit? Or you wrote it after anyway?
Yeah, no, we wrote it first. Something About Mary was
after. Yeah.
Right.
But even that doesn't matter. Like one of my favorite show business stories is Alfred Hitchcock at the height of his success. It was like To Catch a Thief, Vertigo, North by Northwest, these giant, sprawling, gorgeous Technicolor movies. And then he goes, yeah, I just want to make a dirty little black and white movie on the cheap. No. It's like you have no faith that I know what I'm doing. After all, no. That's the same thing with Ed Wood. It's the sincerity of it. That's why Plan 9, I find it, and even more so Glen or Glenda, we could talk about that because Glen or Glenda isn't funny anymore the way it was.
Right. You can't laugh at it.
You can't laugh at it. And as you are exposed more to that world, it's not as funny. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
The thing about Glen or Glenda that I find astonishing, and for people unfamiliar with Glen or, I can't imagine there's anybody listening to this podcast that doesn't know Glen or Glenda, but for those of you who don't, Bennett, describe Glen or Glenda.
Glen or Glenda is a moving and tortured docudrama about transvestism and approaches it with incredible sincerity.
Yeah.
And astonishing ineptitude.
And it's a heartwarming plea for the world to understand why some men want to dress up in
that's
clothing.
The thing. It's, what is it, 52, 54? And he says in a movie, this guy likes to dress up in women's clothes. We don't know why, but he's happy. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't hurt anybody. Get off his ass. And it's astonishing because we're saying this stuff today.
Yep.
Today. This is unrelated to this interview. This is something I posted this morning on Threads and Blue Sky. Totally unrelated to this interview. What if a kid starts to feel that they're in the wrong body, and after a lot of soul searching and therapy, the kid's parents and doctor agree on gender reassignment? And what if, although deep down you think it's weird and even a little spooky, you just went about your life and let them live theirs?
Yeah.
That's what that movie is saying. Completely unrelated. I just happen to be thinking.
And not only does the movie cover that subject at a time when it's astonishing. I think Christine Jorgensen may have been the only person publicly, and it must have been on Ed's mind, like, well, maybe there's but the person who wrote it and directed it stars in it and was a cross-dresser. I mean, it couldn't be more raw and vulnerable and revealing of the creative person behind it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And to get back to that, Bennett, we didn't know that when we first saw Glenn or Glenda.
No.
It was an obscure little film. Nobody knew anything about it. Bennett called me and said, come on over, watch this, because Bela Lugosi's in it. And he plays God or some kind of puppet master pulling the strings. And we watched it together, and we kept thinking, who is the guy who plays Glenn and Glenda? Who is this guy? Because his name was Donald Davis or Daniel A. Davis. Yeah. And he looked a little bit like Alan Young from Mr. Ed.
He's a good-looking guy. He does.
Yeah, he was a good-looking guy.
He does look like Alan Young.
A little bit. We just didn't know who this guy was.
By the way, this is the only podcast dropping today where the host goes, he does look like Alan Young.
Like everybody knows who that is. And so we were shocked as we just started doing research. Now, back then, before the internet, how did you do research on these guys? Well, there were two different ways. There was the Academy Library, but I was still in school, so I had to take a bus to get down to Beverly Hills before they closed at 4:30 or whatever, right after school. Or you had something called the phone book, the white pages.
Right.
We actually started going through the phone book.
I just see pages.
There you go. So these guys were listed in the Los Angeles phone directory. It was crazy. But Phil Tucker, the director of Robot Monster, I found him in the phone book. I took a shot. Like, how many Phil Tuckers are there? I'll just keep calling. But I found him.
Doing journalist legwork.
Yeah, it was hysterical. Well, we were 18, 19. And so
he must have been astounded.
Oh, yeah.
That you cared.
I think he was, until they realized what we were doing. I think at first they thought these are high schoolers just kind of horsing around, having fun with old movies. Nobody knew who they were.
Right.
And then I do think we found Dudley Manlove in the Los Angeles phone book on the white pages. And then we decided to call him up and say, we're doing this film festival where we're showing some of the worst movies ever made. Plan 9, Bride of the Monster, Glenn or Glenda. We were doing this at the New Art Theater on Santa Monica Boulevard near the 405 in West Los Angeles.
Still there.
Said, it's still there, thank God. And he said, I'd love to come. I'm not such a bad looking guy, and I think the ladies would enjoy meeting me, but it will cost a little bit of money. And we said, we can't pay you. I'm really sorry. It's like, okay, well, you guys think about it. So he then kind of just cut us off. He didn't want to talk anymore. But Bennett's friend Paul Clemens, who appeared in The Beast Within later, called Dudley again and tried to get him on the phone. And I think Dudley was onto us and knew it was us calling him. So when he picked up the phone, he said, "Happy Easter," because it was Easter Sunday. We didn't know. And he said, "Yeah, we were looking out for Mr. Manlove. We're calling about, the Worst Films Festival." And he said, Mr. Manlove is not at home right now. This is his manservant, and I will let him know that you called. Goodbye. And then click, just hung up on us. But the fact that Dudley Manlove tried to convince us, Arrows from Plan 9 from Outer Space,
shake you down,
that he had a manservant, who sounds exactly like no one else. I mean, no one has that voice. No one has Dudley Manlove's voice. He is instantly recognizable. That's what Ben and I were going through in the early 80s as we're just dialing for dollars. We would call people on the phone that were listed in the phone book. Joanna Lee, we found, who, played Dudley Manlove's cohort, Tana, in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
She's very good in it.
She's actually great. She was in her early 20s, and she told us, she would ask Ed Wood for her motivation for her character. And he said, "Your motivation, you're getting paid to do this role, young lady. That's your motivation." She didn't want anything to do with us because she also felt this was embarrassing. She had a very respectable career as a TV writer and director. She did that movie Babe with Susan Clark, a lot of other things.
Okay. So, and a director too. There's a book about Ida Lupino that just came out. That is fascinating to me. Really good actress and a really good director.
Yeah, and a fantastic director.
Yeah. Directed one of the best Twilight Zones.
Oh, I never saw that one.
She directed Masks. The one where the...
Oh, she did?
Yeah, that's hers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she did a great job.
And yeah.
Yeah,
no, so it's one of those things where a lot of the folks we were calling had a good sense of humor about it. Some of them did not. This was all to kind of gather research for our category on the worst director of all time, Ed Wood, in the Golden Turkey Awards. The one guy who had a great sense of humor was Gregory Walcott.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, he was just great. And he was always saying, I got the script for this. This was the darndest, weirdest thing I'd ever read. And, he was just, and he often said how bad the movie was and joked about it. And when he got the call from Scott and Larry and Tim Burton to do the Ed Wood movie and have a little cameo in it, he called us and said, like, should I do this? I'm a little bit embarrassed about it. I said, no, come on.
Oh, yeah, own it, yeah.
Great. Yeah, own it. And you'll get residuals for this more than you will for any of your
that Sugarland Express money is probably drying up around now.
Exactly. But at any rate,
but it's good that it is interesting. The one thing that Bobcat and I noticed when we were working on the project that we're working on, is the people that knew him and or the people that knew him, which is a lot of that now.
Yeah.
And here you can't find a bad word about him. Like he was a great guy.
Yes.
Very loyal to his friends. And there's a line in Scott and Larry's movie that speaks to the man that made Glenn or Glenda, and it's my favorite line in the movie. And it's Ed's the only person in town that, I'm paraphrasing, but it's Ed's the only person in town that doesn't judge people. If he did, he wouldn't have any friends. But that was that sense of him.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't overt, it was subtextual. Even in the mid-'80s is what drew certainly people like me. Like I loved Ed Wood and I loved Glenn or Glenda the same reason I loved the Ramones. It's like, these are the guys on the outside. They're not cool. They're never going to be cool. And it's important to have that voice speak to you. In the mid-'80s, we used to wear pink Converse high tops because it angered people.
Right.
Yeah.
Like my father, what the fuck are you wearing? It's like, and that's important. People need that. Not every director has a shrine put up when they pass. But if you go to Bob's Big Boy in Toluca Lake, there's a David Lynch shrine when you go in. Because David Lynch was on the outside and, like Ed Wood, unapologetically. And no, I'm doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Come or go. I don't care. And he also had a very open-hearted attitude towards the world.
100%.
Which I think that speaks to people and people really need it.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why when we first started interviewing Ed Wood's cronies, there was a guy named Chuck Anderson or Charles D. Anderson who worked with Ed Wood at Pendulum Publications. It was an adult book industry.
One of his great novels. One of his many great novels.
Like TV Lust, Diary of a Transvestite Hooker. They worked on those titles together. And he gave me a few of those books.
Let Me Die in Drag.
Yeah, exactly. This is 1979, 1980. Actually, probably 79.
Yeah.
And he told us that, he called them the Fringies. He said many times I was thinking of doing a book about all of Ed Wood's cronies. These were people who would gather at the Brown Derby. And he said, I also don't even know if a novel would do it justice. He said, I really think it's really something out of a movie. So obviously, thankfully what happened is that a lot of this research we had put down on paper, I handed to a guy named Rudolph Gray. So he used a lot of our interviews and published them in his book, Nightmare of Ecstasy.
Right.
And then
Nightmare
later Scott and Larry.
Is another book.
That's another book. Nightmare in Ecstasy. Yeah. No, and that's, and then Scott and Larry wrote the script based upon that book.
Right. Yeah, that book.
So we feel a small little hand in helping get the story told. But as we say, the story must be told. And every time we would call somebody else in Ed Wood's world, the story became weirder and weirder. It was kind of like that scene in Plan 9 where he said, that's the most fantastic story I've ever heard.
Yeah.
The guy says, yeah, and every part of it's true. That's the fantastic part of it. There was every time we'd call somebody, we said like, no way. What? Bela Lugosi was drinking Peraldehyde? No, they can't be. What, they stole an octopus from Republic Studios for Bride of the Monster and they forgot the motor? That couldn't be. Now, a lot of the stuff, it turned out, wasn't exactly true.
Sure.
Ed Wood also embellished a lot of stories himself over the years.
Print the legend.
Yeah, but that's what we did. We printed the legend.
Another great line is, modern women, they've been like that down through the ages.
Yeah, right. That's why they're modern.
Yeah, exactly. Which,
Ding,
Thank you.
ding, 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 ding.
Thank you. So wait, Dana, I have a question for you, which I've asked Bennett before. Do you think that Ed Wood intended some of these lines to be humorous and
No.
they just in the direction? Because come on, how do you write a line like Inspector Clay's dead, murdered, and somebody's responsible? That's clearly a joke.
I think
Or maybe just the delivery didn't come across.
I don't think he did a lot of. You know how they say that there's no writing, there's only rewriting.
Yeah.
I don't think Ed knew that expression.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's because as I told you, Harry, he's as the director as well as the writer. He would have maybe if he had time for take 2, would have said, "Let's do it again, and this time make it funny." You know, no, he did not. He was tone deaf, but that's part of his charm. Yeah,
and it's also interesting to think of the time in which he was making these movies.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, 1954. I talked to Mila Nurmi, who was in Plan 9, and you know, the thing that she pointed out was that what people think of as the 50s is really the very early 60s.
That's right.
You know, what we think of as
like
the happy days.
Yeah.
But, you know, it started around 58.
Yeah.
1953, 1954, and 1955 was very much the 40s still.
Yeah.
And the country was incredibly conservative. You know, it's hard to believe in this day and age, but I'm pretty sure homosexuality was illegal.
I think you could be busted, you put in jail.
Yeah. Well, you'd be safe from it. But yeah, I mean, it was just such a different world for him to be openly, that risque and that blatant, and the stuff that Mila did on the Vampire show was also really risque for that period of time.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So one of the things I love doing, as you know, is finding the locations for these films. Here's the problem. We, all three of us, love the world of Ed Wood so much, but there's not a lot left to explore because most of the people involved in these films are no longer with us. I was trying to find the last remaining cast member, Gloria Day. She's the woman at the funeral in the beginning of Plan 9. She just passed away like last year. I was so upset we didn't get her. So what's left of these movies is the locations. And that's why I love going with you, Dana, to go see the police station from Plan 9 from Outer Space. Now, when my friend Harry Pallenberg said, let's do a whole show called Location Land and we'll do an episode on Plan 9 locations, I said, that's an absolutely horrible idea. I mean, why would you, of all the things that I love about Plan 9, I love the dialogue of it. I love the performances, the special effects, the locations. I don't know. I mean, are there that many locations outside of the studio? But we started diving in and we found a treasure trove of stuff. Yes.
Yes. And it's funny because the locations was a huge part of the appeal to me.
Why?
Because I did not grow up in Southern California. I grew up in a mill town in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I grew up in the town every Stephen King book is set in. And watching that stuff, seeing that stuff is a weird combination of, and this is the thing that's also very magical about Plan 9. It combines gothic horror and science fiction, but the scenes in the cemetery specifically, you've got there's a cemetery is a cemetery with this sort of, every cemetery is a gothic setting, but there's also palm trees in the cemetery. And then a flying saucer lands in the cemetery and Dracula walks out of it. It has this 5-way car crash of influences, but it all works. And that's why I'm such a big Tim Burton fan. Cause I was like, yeah, that's where I want to live. I like Dracula, but I like the Beach Boys and I like them together. It really is, I grew up in Massachusetts watching Dragnet and Adam 12. And to me, like driving around Studio City was this exotic, like, oh my God, I can't imagine. And I never take it for granted. I think of it every morning when I drive down through that's my biggest, my two biggest, if I have any successes in life, it's that, I have great kids that are great people.
Amen.
And I was a kid in Massachusetts with nothing who wanted to live in this magical place and achieved it.
Yeah.
It's just
beautiful. Well put. Well, that's why we did this show. It's on PBS. People can watch it. We did a whole episode on Greece. We did a whole
the show
episode
is called Location Land.
Yes, Location Land. Thank you very much.
It's on PBS National.
Yeah, yes, but you can watch it on their digital channels.
Right.
And you'll be happy to know.
And we'll have a link in the show notes and the Patreon for the show in general and the one that we did.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, and you were so kind to spend a whole 2 days with us.
No, I would have spent 12. I loved it. It was Brent, had you been out to any of these places?
Bennett has not. Bennett was not allowed to come with us. I'm sorry. It was a small little skeleton crew.
But had you never gone before?
I'd never gone before. And I've seen the episode. I've watched it a couple times. It's so fantastic. It's just so much fun to see, but particularly when you go to the house where the old man lived. That's
Fort Johnson's house.
Yeah. And then the other house is the back door.
I know that was correct. That was fantastic.
That is crazy. Yeah, no, it's a total ton of fun. And the more we discover about Ed Wood's world, the more exciting it is, because, Dana, there's still discoveries to be made. So, as you know, when we went to Quality Studios on Santa Monica Boulevard near Western, which is not too far away from Mela's final resting place at Hollywood Forever Cemetery and Paul Marcos, too, you know?
Yeah.
But right in that neighborhood, that's where a lot of Glen or Glenda was shot. That's where Glenn's apartment is, right outside of Quality Studios. That's where he goes window shopping, looking for lingerie, etc. It's all right there on that street.
I wonder what the store is where he looks in the window. Do you know?
It's called Grayson's. You can actually see it if you look at it. Freeze frame.
Do you know what it is now?
Yeah, that's gone. Unfortunately, that one building is gone. It was right next to the Sears.
Okay,
it's probably a dispensary.
I'm sure it's a dispensary or a tattoo shop. I don't know what else it could be.
Yeah, right.
The other fascinating one, and I think it looks like such an amazing building, and I was surprised to hear that I think it's down by Musso's kind of, was the building with the Gothic arch where Martin Landau repeats the Bride of the Monsters at the end of Ed Wood.
Yeah.
It's just in Ed Wood. It's in Ed
movie.
Wood. It's not in Plain Night. It's not in Ed Wood. It's from the biopic. But it's just gorgeous that I never noticed before. And I think it's like right down in the middle of everything. And they just have.
Yeah, I think it's right in the old Hollywood Pacific Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. Yeah. No, and Bordner's and all that. They use some great locations on the Ed Wood movie itself too. No, it's so much fun going to these places because you feel, I'm sure you did, Dana, that you've been to these places before, but not physically, but in the movies.
Yeah.
Like you have this weird cinematic deja vu. Like, why do I know this place so well?
And it's true, especially in the age of digital, enhancement and, locations that don't exist.
Right. So that's why.
Went out to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's why we're planning. The next few episodes. One of them is on White Men Can't Jump and Barbie in Venice, but another one we're planning is with one of the lone surviving cast members. I won't tell you which one of Planet of the Apes.
I know who I was just going to pitch that. I know who the cast member is, and those places are amazing. When you go to Malibu Creek State Park and you go like, oh yeah, this is it, and then you go.
To Point Doom, and that's the thing, is
go
that
to Point Doom, and then you go to Stage 22.
Exactly. Horseshoe Bend. I don't know, but no, it would be so much fun to actually pinpoint the exact spot where the Forbidden Zone is, and is it in front of the big monolith on Point Doom?
I know the person that can take you. I have a friend named Lori, who's just this woman who lives in Pasadena who saw it when she was 12, and loves it, and it just knows, and took me and Paul Greenberg through Malibu Creek State Park into Point Doom. Was like, this was this.
No, we have it. So we have the plot plan from Bill Kraber, who was the production designer and art director on the film, and he was very helpful. And a guy named Ed Hudson, who's no longer with us at Fox, allowed us into this soundstage. It was like number 4 or something. Underneath, it was almost like the end of Citizen Kane. They had this whole warehouse of plot plans and daily production reports, so you could actually pinpoint exactly where at the old Fox Ranch, which is now Malibu Creek State Park.
What is a plot plan?
A plot plan is like an architectural plan. So it shows you here's the Fox Ranch. Here's where the rock pool is, where Charlton Heston goes skinny dipping. Here's Century Lake, where they built Ape Village. So that if they were going to do a sequel or a TV series, as they did with Planet of the Apes,
knew where they were going.
They could go exactly back to the same specific location. And that's how we know exactly where Planet of the Apes was shot. So that's a much easier film to pinpoint.
Right.
But that's going to be a lot of fun.
What I'm about to say is supposed to sound profound, but I guarantee you it's obvious. And that is that when you watch people, because locations and visiting locations now has become so popular with people. And we watch movies and TV and it's surreal. We're watching something on a screen and it's an art form that's existing in this surreal place. But then the reality is there are places where they were shot and made. And so you can go and visit it and it becomes real, like where I'm in the real place of this surreal piece of thing that I saw.
Right.
I think that's what fascinates movies, like for people about movies. Is like, oh my God, I'm standing and this is the place where they shot MASH, and it's thrilling to be there because it sort of brings something that was not real, makes it real.
Yeah. You can't find as much of this as you used to be able to find because people have taken it away from the location. But there used to be a lot of Ape City lying around Fox Ranch.
Look at that. Wow. Look at you. I have one too. After the fire, look at that.
That's incredible.
And I walked out of there with like a 35-pound knapsack full of it. I actually destroyed a knapsack because it ripped. But I would just give it to people. Like people would come over and go, "Here, you need to have a piece of Ape City." Like
it's crazy.
And that's a photo of them building it.
Wow.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So after the Woolsey fire, a lot of it was uncovered because it used to be covered by brush.
Right.
And then the brush is gone. You could kind of see this little fiberglass or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was this weird sort of, it was this, it formed of like a type of light concrete. It was really, like, that was the thing, like Bill Creeber and John Chambers, these guys were also chemists.
Yeah.
Like, I can attest to the brilliance of the makeup design and the brilliance of the material. It's, it is one of those things. And, the movie was shot in May of 1967. And you see, because when I worked on The Simpsons, I went into the Fox files. And looked at, everything I could.
Yeah.
They were still getting it right around April. Like they were still not 100% there. It all just, but that was back when it really was a factory. Like, I'm just gonna move it through, get it done, get it done.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, no, it is like movie archaeology, as we've said. It's
that's
really
perfect.
Kind of fun.
Yeah,
it's fun to, especially because a lot of this stuff is still not documented. You think the whole history of film is already uncovered, it's all revealed, it's all out there, and we keep finding man's constant groping of things unknown. What was the line from Glenn or Glenda with Bela Lugosi? Just that we feel like we're constantly discovering new things every day.
Yeah, and it's really true. And all of those things I love, again, like growing up when I grew up, I was like driving around the valley and seeing like where, that's the Brady house. Like, these things mean stuff to you,
I know, but part of the problem, Ben, and you can attest to this too, is that growing up in LA, people took it for granted that the film industry would always be here. So they didn't really catalog the information. There's no plaques up anywhere. It's very few. If it's Chicago and this is where the Fugitive was shot or whatever, they're going to put a plaque up on the wall. But here they didn't really I think they took film history for granted. And now that so few feature films are shot in LA, they're not taking it for granted anymore. There's a whole new movement of trying to bring people back. And that's one of the reasons we're doing Location Land, is to try to, remind people of our great cinematic legacy.
Yeah.
And to bring production back home.
Yeah. This is why this town is here.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny when people were complaining, when people were talking about the fires. It's fine to complain about a fire. And I always like that, they had to find a million conspiracies. You don't need to find a reason for a fire to be bad.
Yeah, right.
It's just like, it's bad.
Yes, it is.
But it's like, it's one of the reasons, why are these fires? Because we're not supposed to be here. That's why nothing that's here is from here. The water's from up north. The palm trees are from Florida. The people are from New York. The only thing that's indigenous is the fire.
Wow.
It's truly insane. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions in addition to Location Land. I was looking at the titles of the 50 worst films of all time, and I wanted to get some quick responses for you on a couple of them as to why you included them. Like, we all know Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. We all, we get that. Airport 75. And I ask this because I saw it recently on a big screen.
And how does it hold up?
It's madness. But what I find interesting is you can't have teeth like that anymore if you're a movie star. Charlton Heston's smile in that movie looks like the skyline of Dresden the day after the bombing. And there's these giant close-ups of his teeth, and there's like a piece of sandwich in there. Same with Omega Man. He's got these giant, and his mouth looked like an experiment. Like, how many teeth can we get in a mouth? It's bananas, but I'm interested.
It was okay to have
how
bad teeth in the movies back then. I mean, nobody really cared. It seems like
today or a bad tooth. Like, I was watching Brannigan.
John Wayne, yeah.
John Wayne. He had that was a lazy ass toupee. Like, did people just not care? My wife always teases me, like, in another life, I was a makeup artist, because, like, as a wig, toupee, wig, toupee. Like, I can spot it. And it was just like, it's like, you didn't want to give that another couple of minutes.
Exactly. Let the paste dry. Yeah.
Well, the brilliance of Steve Martin's piece is that he doesn't look like a piece, because you could see underneath it. It's like, it looks like he's losing his hair, but he still has hair. Like, you can't suddenly have a badger sleeping on your head.
By the way, when I was a kid and Star Trek was, the original Star Trek, I would watch. It was my favorite series. My parents knew somebody who knew someone involved with the production, and he got me these little black and white publicity shots of Star Trek. And the close up of William Shatner, you can clearly see, like, this was undertouched.
The lace.
Clearly see the lace. And I would look at it as a kid and go, I don't understand this. What is this? Nobody explained it to me then. I wish I had those pictures now, but either somebody released them who hated Shatner so much that they didn't retouch it. But I wish I still had those pictures. Yeah, they were all autographed.
Dana, you were asking about Airport 1975. The book was written in 1976.
Okay.
Published in 78. So honestly, we were trying to put some current movies in there. That explains why we have some really good movies in there that shouldn't be in there, like The Omen, which makes no sense to be in a book on bad movies.
Right.
But when we took our poll of readers and we asked them, what are your choices for the worst films of all time?
Sure, and they would see something recent, yeah.
Almost everything except for Plan 9 was something recent. Here's the top 10. Number 2 was The Exorcist 2, The Heretic. Number 3 was King Kong. And then going down the list, you got The Swarm.
The 76 King Kong.
The 76 King Kong, thank you. Right. Then The Swarm, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Airport 77, Orca, Airport 1975 was on there. At Long Last Love. And you know what number 10 was? Grease with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John.
Wow.
So it just shows people, their taste change. And back then, people, they were a little
Sgt.
harsher.
Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band absolutely deserves to be on
stay
that
on
list.
it.
Here's one. This is a movie that I've not seen. We talk about it on the other interview in this podcast. By the time this airs, I will have seen it.
What's that?
Zabriskie Point.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen it either.
It's not a horrible movie. It's unfortunate. We did put that in our list of the 50 worst films of all time. Once again, going after current films, we were trying to slaughter a few sacred cows like Michelangelo Antonioni.
Right. What is it about Zabriskie Point that was kind of like, I don't think so.
Look, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but it's pretty incongruous. It probably helps if you've had a drink or two or something else.
Sure. Like the last movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the last movie with Dennis Hopper. Yeah. But the performances are, Mark Frechette and Daria Halpern were just not great actors. Yeah. But it's not one of the worst movies ever made. Right. And a lot of the films in there, look, They were art films that maybe were not among the director's best. We've put Sam Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia in there, which is now considered a classic.
Well, that we're coming right into what I'm going to talk about in the True Tales from Weirdsville segment of the podcast. But things that, when they come out at the time, people just aren't ready for them. The way Glen or Glenda has really changed.
Yeah.
And it isn't. It's not, you can't laugh at that anymore. It's, we've matured as a culture and we know more.
Yeah.
I'm unapologetic about saying, seeing Ed Wood in drag with a mustache is funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
I get, doesn't mean I think he's a joke or it's a joke, but especially with the mustache, it's like, yeah, I'm going to laugh at that. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
100%.
The yearning and the request for tolerance is very sincere. The other thing about Glen or Glenda that Scott Alexander pointed out is it's a different movie every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It just completely changes whatever it's talking about every 10 minutes. But a movie, when David Lynch passed away, I, like a lot of people, I went back on a David Lynch deep dive. A movie that was despised when it came out. And I was one of the people that hated it. I saw it opening night. I remember walking out of the theater going, what'd I ever do to you? Was Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, which now many people consider a masterpiece.
Right. I think it was too dark for people's taste back then.
Yeah. I mean, it's still dark, but it's been reappraised as a lot better than people think, in the way that the Academy Awards, in retrospect, maybe Raging Bull was a better picture than Ordinary People.
Maybe.
And that's common. But it is interesting how those things change over time.
And there's a writer named Will Sloan who's up in Canada who's working on a book about Ed Wood, where he reappraises all of his movies, including Glen or Glenda, as being almost dreamlike. They have a certain dreamlike quality, and it's really a beautiful appraisal of Ed Wood's work. It's called Ed Wood Made in Hollywood, USA. I think it comes out in June. He sent me an advance copy. Yeah, no, I can't wait. I'm just reading it now, but it's a wonderful piece of work. He really goes deep into these films, kind of like Catherine Coldiron did.
Yeah, I was just saying her name. Yeah, Catherine Coldiron did a monograph about Plan 9 that really nailed it. I mean, what was her? I'm paraphrasing again. I'm paraphrasing, but it's like it's a filmed attempt at making a movie.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a movie in the sense that, like, a 6-year-old soccer game is a soccer game. It's like,
here we are sitting here in 2025 talking about Ed Wood with love and affection and reverence. It took decades for us to get here, and no one would have thought. I mean, he could have just he could have disappeared. And there are many, but we love him so much, and it took this long for us to get here. But it's just such a sweet thing that we're able to be here now. And I'm moved by it. He finally gets the appreciation that he probably wanted and certainly deserved. We can say 100%. That seriously. We're not making fun of it. We really mean it.
Both of you guys and myself are, we're very, very lucky. We're really lucky that we get to indulge our passions to make a living.
Very grateful.
Right.
Very grateful.
Do you feel as our culture is in a period that is, I wouldn't even say conservative, it's repressive and authoritarian in the macro, caused by people's insecurity and fear at a rapidly changing culture? Do you, like I, feel more and more like Joel Grey at the beginning of Cabaret every morning? We're just, the girls are beautiful. They're beautiful. It doesn't matter.
I do feel like you entertain us and help us get through the tough times.
Yeah,
that's my answer.
I only
a little bit like Joel Grey.
But I do feel, especially now, like that it's the David Lynch shrine. I need a vigorous commitment to the weird because it's I feel like it's evaporating.
I don't understand how we go backwards when we go backwards, but it shocks me. I'm like, it doesn't motion move forward? But I mean, Dumb and Dumber, we'd have to take jokes out of Dumb and Dumber. There are things we could not do that was happily accepted and laughed at in 1994.
Yeah,
that's 94. You're 30 years ago, and we're in a darker place than that when it comes to comedy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I talked to Goldthwait about this a lot. I don't know. I'm just doing. I give money and I vote and I care and I use my platforms, but I love what I love, and I feel a responsibility to continue to feed that.
Yeah.
There's no, Famous Monsters magazine was so important to me as a kid that you can't abandon. You have to keep putting that stuff out there because there's some kid out there. Some kid out there needs to hear it. Somebody out there needs to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why we're doing the show Location Land, is just to capture these stories because, Randall Kleiser, one of our great storytellers, the director of Grease, and just being able to go on a road trip with him down the LA River. Yeah. It's wonderful. And I want to make sure we get all these storytellers on film before it's too late.
People like us, the things that we love, to get it on tape. It's the show-up project of entertainment,
That's it.
That's
it.
That's right.
Yeah. Like, we're an hour or two of our Larry Hovis deep dive.
Really? Really? And let's get it, because at least it's being saved and kept safe. Oh boy.
Yeah.
God, I'm just looking at this. So many movies. We could
thank you for your part.
We could talk about the trial of Billy Jack for 2 hours.
Oh no, let's not.
Movie with a 21-minute ramp up to a whooping. Anyway, Location Land is on PBS. We'll have a link for it and the Patreon. And Bennet, is there anything you want to draw people's names to? Is there anything you want to draw people's attention to?
Yes, strangely enough, a spec script that I co-wrote with my writing partner, James Robert Johnston, was sold minutes before the writer's strike started, and they shot it during the strike, and it might come out this year. It's called Day of the Dead, and it's not a comedy, it's a supernatural thriller.
Great.
Just keep.
Is it about November 1st, or is it a zombie thing?
It's about January 6th. No, yeah. It is about Day of the Dead is part of the theme. So yeah, November 1st, but it's a supernatural thriller, and that should be out this year.
Yeah. Again, like me, you write in your people don't understand. Like, I'm finishing a murder mystery kind of thing, and people like, aren't you a comedy writer? Yeah, I can eat chicken and fish. I can do both.
I'm a working writer. That's what I say.
Yeah, I'm a working writer.
And I love genre. So
yeah. I'd say Jerry Seinfeld was once saying, and it's really true. It's like people like, how can you like Dr. Strangelove and the Three Stooges? It's like I can like wine and ice cream. I can like do things that aren't the same thing.
But the question is, how do you have time to be a good dad and a good husband? I don't get it. You have so many things going on.
Kids.
Oh, come on.
Well, 2 of my kids are in college, and and so I. But
you still have one more you're dropping off.
And she's got her. Yeah, and she's got her. My youngest has her learner's permit, so now twice a day at least, I'm just like, okay, slow down. It's a lot of. Okay, good. No, you're not going to go now. It's yellow. You stop. It's the only thing I'm good at.
Oh gosh,
yeah.
We love you, Dana. Thank you so much for having us on.
This was great.
Such a pleasure.
Bennet Yellin, Harry Medved, thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
And we'll see you at the movies.
A
Another podcast reach for the sky. The Dana Gould Hour.
We barely
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out. You want me? Peace out. Boom.